Hello everybody, welcome into another stream. Hope you're doing well as usual. So on last night's stream, we watched a series of videos. First was Living Jarcletus's Godwin is Not Godfrey's Son. Then we watched Lee 8's I'm Sorry for Doubting Lies of P. Then we had Titans the Two Fingers and Elden Ring Explained, Elden Ring Lore. Then we followed that up with Gaming as a Perfectionist by Daryl Talks Games. And that took a little bit longer than I was anticipating, and so we did not get to Levovitz Lore's video yesterday about the Dung Eater, but he had actually talked to me off stream and had pointed out that the Dung Eater's ending being the best is not actually the first part of a video series that he has going on, and instead why evolution is a bad thing, ? Crucible and Omens Symbolism is the first part in this two-part series. So I don't think that's like the best way to frame this, because this sounds like it should be a standalone video by all means. So that might be just a little bit of a constructive feedback to think about in terms of titling these things or like working with your thumbnails, because yeah, I just had no way of knowing that without like looking into the description of the videos. So anyway, welcome on in. Levo, nice to have you again. Glad you're here early. And Galaxy Dragon, how's it going? Have I heard about the news of Sony possibly purchasing FromSoft's parent company, Kadokawa? Yeah, so a lot of people, we were talking about this on the Discord, and hold on, who brought up the points? Because if you're a little bit more familiar with like Japanese, I don't want to say culture, but I can't think of a better word right now. Media, that's probably the better word. If you're more familiar with Japanese media, you know that Kadokawa isn't necessarily just like the parent company of FromSoft specifically, as they are kind of their own media conglomerate that make a lot of publications for things like manga and stuff. And so it's a pretty big story if it's even allowed to go through it all. So we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, thanks for bringing it to my attention again. So, okay, folks. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive on into... Oh, yeah, I forgot. Why Evolution is a Bad Thing, Crucible and Omen Symbolism by Levovit Lore. And then following that up, I'm assuming we'll only get through Acer Aesthetics, Kegare themes Kegare themes of From Software, and in brackets 1. So this might be part of a series, and then we might need to like watch another video another time. So anyway, that is what I have queued up for tonight. You're scared, Levo? Good. All right, here we go.
Without order, nothing can exist. But without chaos, nothing can evolve.
Disclaimer, hold on here. I recommend watching this video with subtitles enabled due to my bad accent. Thank you for your patience. All right. So I had enabled them, and I think you just didn't have the first part subtitled because it was already written on the screen. So I was a little bit confused by that, but that's not a big deal at all. Dang YouTube.
In our world, evolution is often seen as a force for good, driving species to adapt. But in the Elden Ring, evolution takes on a darker, more sinister role. Why does the game portray evolution as something controversial, perhaps even harmful concept? What can the feared Omens and the formidable Crucible Knights tell us about the danger of unchecked changes?
Alright, so this is going to be a little bit of a heavy pill to swallow, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time to Levovit Lore, and this is one of those things that might unironically ruin the video for people in chat. So I'm also going to apologize for people in chat. And I'm not trying to be like too dramatic, because for most people, I imagine it's not going to be that big of a deal. But as soon as I point this out, you might be unable to not hear it anymore, which can affect your enjoyment of the video. So one thing that I've noticed so far right off the bat is while you were recording, you had a lot of mouth noises going on. So while you're talking, there are these inadvertent clicking noises due to the saliva in your own mouth. And to me, this is almost like a video killer on my own end for production, because I have to do a lot of extra takes to try to either minimize the noises that my mouth is making or I have to spend more time editing the noises out between like certain syllables and things like that, which really sucks. So a lot of people might not care about this, but this might also be enough of a distraction that it could turn people away from your video. So I don't really have a great way of showing this off without like repeating a section of the video over and over again. So I might need to do that just to illustrate my point, just to bring up awareness to this, because it can be pretty distracting. Titan says that can be so annoying. You end up drinking so much water. Yeah. And hey, little church lore, how's it going? And Titan, welcome back into the stream. So there are some tips to try to mitigate this. Like, don't have caffeinated beverages before or while you're doing like your voice recording sessions. And obviously, as Titan was saying, you drink a lot of water. One little tip is to like maybe have a slice of apple followed up by some water after that. Sometimes citrus might help too a little bit, but other times it just takes a steady stream of listening back to your recording right after you make it to see if your own mouth noise is betraying you and making things hard to pay attention to. Captini, nice to see you again. You said just add ASMR to the title and then the mouth noises are fine. God, I hate ASMR. Yeah, ASMR, like, very few things like actually get me angry, but for some reason, the sound of like whispering incessantly just aggravates me for like no real reason. And this one isn't even like misophonia so much, because I definitely have misophonia, which is like the hatred of certain sounds, but I don't know, there's something about ASMR that pisses me off. All right. Yeah, you're welcome, Levo, and I'm glad you're taking that pretty well. And then Mao, welcome back into the stream. How's it going? So I'm going to try to back it up a little bit so that way we get your full thoughts, since I've like talked so much. And then I'll also try to point out a little bit of what I'm talking about more directly. So I also had the thought, and this isn't related to the video, I apologize, but you know how occasionally I get like memory errors in watching videos? I've been wondering if part of that is because of like this weird buffering situation going on where I need to scroll down to the comments, and like there must be something going on with Chrome. I might need to look into this more and maybe disable like the 2 extensions that I have on. Yeah. We still love Miss Chalice. Miss Chalice is almost at the point for me where it's annoying, but she's like right on the line. Like if she was any more ASMR, I would hate it. Like it's not my preferred style by any means, but I can tolerate her is what it was. It might not be the nicest thing to say, but that's unfortunately just how I feel. And to be fair, like a lot of people don't necessarily like my voice either. So I definitely recognize that I am throwing stones in a glass house, as they like to say.
In our world, evolution is often seen as a force for good, driving...
Alright, so right after you say good here, you can kind of hear like the mouth click. So, sorry, this is going to go back too far. But if you pay attention to right after good, that's the kind of noise that I'm talking about.
In our world, evolution is often seen as a force for good, driving species to adapt. But in the Elden Ring, evolution takes on a darker, more sinister role. Why does the game portray evolution as something controversial, perhaps even harmful concept? What can the feared Omens and the formidable Crucible Knights tell us about the danger of unchecked changes? This video is part 1 of a 2-part series discussing the unsettling ending of the Dung Eater. Be sure to subscribe, so you don't miss the conclusion. Today's journey will be divided into 4 comprehensive sections, each delving deeper into this intricate topic.
So you have the trial aspect, chaos aspect. I'm not sure that I would agree with these principles without you like establishing what they are a bit more, so we might be getting ahead of ourselves right here. So I'm just, trying to absorb what you have on the screen right now. The video is made before DLC? Okay, no worries. Thanks for that heads up though, because yeah, it has been a minute, huh? Man, YouTube though.
We'll begin by outlining the basic mechanisms of evolution in natural world. Understanding this fundamental concept is essential to grasp how Elden Ring twists this principle into its narrative. Next, we explore the lore surrounding the Crucible.
Yeah, like right there, you just have a lot of mouth noise to the point where it might actually be distracting for some people. And of course, with me pointing it out, it's going to be a little bit more distracting, but just something to be aware of in the future there. I'll back it up.
Next, we explore the lore surrounding the Crucible, dissecting how it symbolizes the process of evolution within the game's universe and what it signifies for the inhabitants of the land between. In the third section, we'll delve into the lore of the Omens, examining how these beings exemplify the game's portrayal of random evolutionary changes and the consequences that arise from such mutations. The main topic. In this crucial section, we'll address the core question: why is evolution depicted negatively in the Elden Ring? We'll analyze the implication of this portrayal and what it suggests about the broader themes of the game.
Trial aspect, chaos aspect.
Evolution is the process through which a living organism changes.
This also isn't important, but does anybody else ever get reminded of the stupid Law and Order sound effect when they hear the Dark Souls like area thing pop up? Because I do. Hey, next, how's it going? Now Levo's hearing the sounds. Yeah, so that's why I wanted to apologize in advance, because it's one of those things where you can't unhear it once it gets brought to your attention. And I was fortunate enough that got brought to my attention kind of early on in my video making process, and cursed that it got brought up, so now I have to pay more attention to it.
Change and develop over millions of years. Often, we associate evolution with progress and beneficial changes. However, it's crucial to recognize that evolution is not inherently good. It's a neutral process, marked by both advantageous and detrimental changes. At the heart of evolution lies the concept of genetic variation, which arises from random mutation in the DNA of organisms. These mutations are spontaneous and lack any...
What is that footage right there? Alright, so part of the reason why I stopped it was, one, because that was funny, and then two, I remembered the other thing that I wanted to mention a moment ago. So with evolution in Elden Ring, I'm not sure that I would agree with the characterization that it's looked upon negatively as much as like de-evolution was, or regression, atavism, whatever you want to call it. So I'm a little bit curious to see how you'll support these claims going forward.
Direction or purpose, injecting a significant element of chaos into the genetic framework. For example, there is a small chance that a human could be born with 6 fingers. This occurrence is entirely random. It could happen to anyone. This randomness is fundamental, as it contributes to the vast diversity observed in the biological world. This illustrates the cardinal link between evolution and chaos. After all, it is fundamentally a game of chance.
I'm debating whether or not I want to get on the pedantic horse of like whether the concept of chaos truly exists. And I don't know, in some ways I don't like throwing the term chaos around when it's in a more scientific setting, because it can kind of imply a lack of order in the universe, whereas there are strong arguments to be made that even these seemingly chaotic mutations are not actually that chaotic and are just a natural consequence of life and whatnot. So that's just kind of something that always sticks out to me.
It's important to note that not all mutations confer benefits. In fact, many mutations are neutral, and often they can be even harmful. Yet, occasionally, a mutation may provide an organism with a competitive edge in specific environment. This is when natural selection comes into play, acting as the primary mechanism driving evolution. Take giraffe, for example. A common misconception is that giraffes evolved long necks out of desire to reach higher lives. In reality, giraffes with shorter necks were just unable to retrieve food and died. Those with longer necks survived and reproduced. This adaptation was not a conscious choice. Giraffes did not decide to grow longer necks. Screw that, Perhaps some giraffes like their short necks. It is rather natural selection favored these with longer necks, illustrating that evolution is not about conscious decision, but about a trial, or rather a series of trials where only the most adaptive survive.
Metaphorical meaning of Crucible.
The Crucible is an enigmatic entity. Players who didn't pay enough attention to the lore probably didn't even realize that Crucible is a thing. Yet, its influence on the narrative landscape cannot be understated. Nearly every major faction in the lands between holds some tie to the Crucible, whether through direct connection like Godfrey, the Godskin and the Omens, or through more elusive links like Placidusax, Destined Death and Radagon. I will not uncover the whole lore of Crucible. It's too big, and it's not the point of this video. Instead, I'll focus on its metaphorical significance and the broader implication it holds within the game. For those of you interested in a more detailed analysis of the Crucible itself, I highly recommend Crunchy's video on the subject. It's exceptionally well done and provides a thorough exploration. Okay, so what is Crucible? From Crucible Tree Armor and Siluria's Tree, we learn: holds the power of the Crucible of Life, the primordial form of the Erdtree. The primordial form of the Erdtree is close in nature to life itself. Furthermore, aspects of the Crucible reveals more about its nature. This is a manifestation of the Erdtree's primal vital energies, an aspect of the primordial Crucible, where all life was once blended together. So Crucible was once a tree, and much like the Erdtree, shares similar life-giving properties. Like the Crucible was the source of all life, paintings within Leandal depicts individuals growing directly from the Erdtree, suggesting that the Erdtree, like the Crucible, has the power to generate life. Melena's dialogue also implies that there is another way to be born in this world.
Does being born of a mother mean one behaves in such a manner?
And all lives that once inside this Crucible.
To be fair with the whole Melina situation, we could chalk it up to her kind of amnesia, just not making her able to remember how a family relationship is supposed to work. So that one is a little bit more arguable, but I just want to bring that up.
Were blended into one undistinguishable thing. In real life, it is also something similar. Crucible is a container, in which metals or other substances can be heated to very high temperatures. It seems correlated. Fire, metaphorically, has a funny property. It can unify many things into one singular substance. If we burn several...
Oh no, does that mean that the Crucible gave rise to the Ashen One in Dark Souls 3 with that image? Oh man.
Things into one...
The Ashen One? Alright, so... Levo's starting to notice there's too much setup. The video feels a bit too drawn out. I don't necessarily feel that. I feel like you're trying to cover your bases, and I typically call out when I think things are being a little bit too reductive. And you might be right just from your own estimation, but this isn't like egregious or anything. This is trying to give people a little bit of insight, particularly if they don't know what a Crucible is. So yeah, Little Church Lawyer thinks it's interesting so far, if that makes you feel any better. And then, hey Adlai, how's it going? Melina straight up said he has a mother. No, so what I'm saying is Melina recognizes that Bach has a mother, but she's also implying, because of her statement that, is this what it means to be born of a mother, that she might not be born of a mother? And that's why I was saying that she may have still been born of a mother, but just kind of like forgotten what that really means because of her amnesia. So I don't think like what Levo said was wrong, but it's just kind of arguable is the point.
Singular substance. If we burn several different pieces of wood, it will all become one singular ash. Same with Crucible. It is used to melt different metals.
And I do feel like this argument so far is kind of reductive, because even if you have a byproduct after a fire, it isn't necessarily guaranteed that the chemical compound will all be ash, because you could still have like metal fragments that didn't necessarily burn. Maybe the fire wasn't hot enough. So there are a lot of contingencies, although maybe that doesn't ultimately detract from your point. I just do think this is a little too simplified.
And as a result, we will get one singular liquid-like substance. That is why fire is so effective against Scarlet Rot, because they are metaphorically opposite. Rot embodies the cycle of death and rebirth. As one living organism decays, it gives rise to new life. For instance, a rotting tree becomes a host to numerous parasitic mushrooms and other fungi. Similarly, in everyday life, food in warm place will rot, becoming a breeding ground for insects and bacteria. So rot symbolizes how life can emerge from decay, where the death of one organism leads to the birth of many others.
One of the craziest thought experiments to me is that theoretically one could remove all the microbial bacteria within a human being, or let's just say instead of a human being, a piece of flesh, and if they were to take that piece of flesh and put it in a vacuum, in outer space where no other microbes could get into it, there is an unironic reality that that piece of flesh would never rot, and it's pretty much all rot is the product of some forms of microorganisms or maybe macroorganisms, I don't know. So anyway, hey Phantom Leaves, how's it going? Nice to see you again.
And fire is about melting many lives into one singular liquid-like crucible. Because of such properties of fire, we can recreate Crucible by burning all life.
Melt it all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
The hollow tree guarded by Crucible Knight Siluria might indeed be the original Crucible tree, where all life was once merged. Its hollow interior suggests it could have served as a container. And interestingly,
and do keep in mind, if anybody just joined the stream a little bit late, that Levo did make his video before the DLC had arrived.
The Crucible tree set is found within this tree, supporting this theory. Another meaning of the word Crucible is a trial. Crucible is used to refer to a situation in which something is tested or a conflict takes place, often one which produces something new. Sounds similar?
And to be fair, we don't exactly get that connotation from Crucible, which is what the Crucible is called in Japanese, and it is kind of more directly focused to that idea of a melting pot where things get melted down together, yeah. But of course I don't blame Levo for that.
Let me jump to the conclusion. The Crucible in Elden Ring metaphorically represents the process of evolution, focusing specifically on its trial aspects, the natural selection. As Tarnish archaeologist brilliantly explained in his video, this statue symbolizes the Crucible and the birth of the Erdtree, from a single...
And while I do think that this is a likely idea, I would disagree with how definitively it's stated in that video, and pretty much everything can be argued that's not concrete and written in stone, essentially.
Root, many trees sprouted, but only one emerged victorious in this natural contest, eventually becoming the Erdtree. The numerous roots found in the deep root depths could represent the other contenders that failed to prevail in this evolutionary challenge. Also, in another video, the Tarnish...
So Levo says in chat, Crucible could be a term that was created in English, like something Martin had made up in the original lore book. You could be right about that, but if that is the case, then I could also say, well then why did the developers choose to highlight the aspect of it being a melting pot more so than a trial by metaphorical fire, which I don't think is too important either way.
Archaeologist describes how Crucible Knights once participated in the Colosseum, what further proves their relation with trials. The concept of all life blended together also perfectly fits in this metaphor. If we trace back along the evolutionary timeline, we see that diverse species converge to a common ancestor, regardless of the variety of present-day species. If we trace far enough back, they all share the same origin, until we get to the origin of life itself. That is what Crucible means. And funny enough, evolutionary diagram.
So Night Scott brings up an interesting point. I'm going to try to back up the video to highlight it.
What Crucible means.
So Night Scott was saying that in this statue, the central flower is larger than in the other ones. So he believes that this could be a later event, that once this sprouted more, we had more sprouts following it, which I think is a neat idea. He's going to talk about Luca? I don't know what that means.
And funny enough, evolutionary diagrams are often depicted as trees. The tree of life, the Crucible. This connection between the Crucible and evolution is further emphasized in items like the Crucible gauntlets. In time, the strength shown by this knight, and even their appearance, was seen as chaotic and deserving of scorn. As mentioned earlier, evolution is inherently chaotic, marked by random mutations and unpredictable outcomes. Thus, the association of the Crucible with chaos in Elden Ring is certainly not coincidental. Crucible Feather Talisman item also adds to this. A vestige of the Crucible of primordial life, born partially of devolution. It was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced. Civilization, of course, represents order, and it's only natural that chaos and order are fundamentally incompatible due to their opposite natures. Just as Crucible serves as a metaphor for the natural selection aspects of evolution, I theorize that Omens represent the random mutations of evolution. More specifically, not just random harmless mutation, but those which bring disadvantages, the bad genes. But first, lore. Who exactly are Omens? Omens are defined by one of the aspects of the Crucible, horns. Any living creature can be born with the horns. People, animals, and even gods, which is evident from the budding horn description. This horn began to sprout on a beast that typically bears no horn. Perhaps it's a vestige of the primordial Crucible. Deer, sheep, or even lions are not safe from random ill mutations. Judging from remembrance of the Omen King, we can say for sure, Omen become Omen by birth. The very same fate.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to point out, that Morgott was born as an Omen based off of that item description, because there was always the question of whether or not Marika had her children and then the Horn Scent could have like cursed them to become more Omen-like, but of course that's also not super well supported by the text due to the virtue of the Crusades spearheaded by Mesmer having occurred later in the timeline than the Omen should have been born. But of course, this video was made before the DLC occurred as well, so there's nothing like really wrong with what he's saying. Hey Mowall28, how is it going? This is Why is Evolution a Bad Thing? Crucible and the Omens Symbolism by Levelbit Lore. He's in chat. Hey, thank you. Alright, so Night Scott says the Baron carvings suggest that Omens were born that way too. Only the Albinorix Moog seemingly infuses with blood flame grow horns after being born. That's true, isn't it? Maybe there's other things which could grow horns after the fact. Oh, well, I guess we also technically could look at the regal ancestor spirits as continuing to grow horns by the virtue of budding, by taking in more and more life into themselves. Which is a pretty big deal when you consider like the spiritual connections between the horn scent and their horns and things like spirit calculi. So like the more life, aka death, spirit you bring into yourself, the more likely you're able to bud and bloom with new life. So let's continue on. Oh, and there's also the not just the Albinorix, but potentially the Sanguine Nobles as well.
Occurs with misbegottens. The misbegottens are held to be a punishment for making contact with the Crucible, and from birth they are treated as a slave or worse. They are treated as slaves because they have Crucible aspects, and since that was from birth, it is safe to assume that contact with Crucible is happening during birth. Similar to how mutations are determined at birth. These traits are then passed down through generations by your genes, your blood. There is tons of evidence in the game that Omen's traits are carried specifically by blood. Each time Elden Ring discusses the Omen's powers of Mog and Morgoth, it specifically references their blood. Mog accursed blood erupted with fire, and Outer God bestows power to Mog upon accursed blood. Mog's rune is soaked in accursed blood, the accursed blood that Morgoth recanted and sealed away. Also, from War Sarachengaun, of the sergeants that were abducted by the Lord of Blood, none were able to tame the accursed blood. Mog, Lord of Blood, transplanted his cursed blood into his followers, which visibly affected them. The Albinorix who served Mog displays Omen horns, a direct consequence of carrying his blood. This confirms that they inherited his Omen traits, the same random mutations found in Mog's genes. Thus, Omens are indeed defined by their blood. For an easier
So then, you don't necessarily have to have an answer to this, Levo. One question that I would ask you would be, do you believe that Albinorix literally take on the DNA or the genes of Mog or their accursed blood? I do think there is potentially some argument to be made for that with the way that silver tiers that have runes can transform into like the fallen hawks essentially. But aside from that, we also do have the Sanguine Nobles that have like a bunch of horns on them, like coming through their feet and stuff. But it's also interesting then that the Tarnished doesn't start growing a horn or anything like that when they take Mog's blood. Although I guess their eyes do get a bit more like bloodshot or whatever you want to call it. So maybe there's something more there. Hey, without horns, welcome back in. So Captini, could you elaborate on who Venom Snake is? Because I don't know what you're talking about with that.
Understanding of the metaphorical meaning of omens, you can think of omen horns as diseases that creatures or humans are born with. For instance, consider gangrene. It is potentially fatal condition that often turns the affected skin a greenish-black color. I will not include footage of real-life photos as they can be quite disturbing. I don't recommend looking this up either due to their graphic nature. It looks kinda similar to Omen legs. However, to illustrate the point, you can observe Morgoth tooth instead. Gangrene happens when the blood flows to a large area of tissues cut off. Similarly to the traits of Omens, it is caused by blood. And more notably, amputation, the surgical removal of a limb, has historically been a common treatment for severe cases of gangrene to prevent the spread of infection and decay. As civilization advanced, we developed antibiotics, which offer a safer and more effective method to combat gangrene. I believe such types of diseases were the inspiration of Omens. And from Omen Burn and Regal Omen Burn we know that amputation was a common method to treat omens. But Omen, born of reality, do not have their horns exist. Because in Elden Ring world medicine is not as advanced as in ours, parents of omens cannot afford full treatment, and must resort to amputation. However, royal children born with omen traits are treated differently. They are kept underground, possibly in the hope that a cure might be found, or just to protect them. And Great Omen Killer Cleaver specifically mentions the amputation process. The blade of this huge, loathsome cleaver comprises a row of amputated omen horns, weapon of slaughter wielded by omen killers. The hideous horns cause blood loss. These weapons were specifically crafted as tools against omens, whose defining characteristic is their blood. Therefore, it makes sense that omen killers would use these weapons with the intention of making omens lose all their blood.
So Aldrich says to protect them, or was it because they were ashamed of them? I think it could be a little bit of both, because the fact that the Royal Omen's horns were not excised does show at least arguably some form of mercy conferred upon them, although mercy of being thrown in a sewer might not seem entirely merciful to the everyday average Joe who doesn't live in a sewer. I don't know. So anyway, Jesse says, Boss Foot Disease Lore, Pog, play of game. Very, very well. Welcome back into the stream, Jesse. And Mr. Yada, nice to see you again.
Another reason to believe that omens are not inherently evil, but rather afflicted, can be found in perfumer Tricia's spirit ashes. Tricia was once known as a healer, who dedicated her effort to treating misbegotten, omen, and all this seen as impure. So there were people like Tricia trying to specifically cure this disease. However, Tricia's effort ultimately failed. This failure is understandable given the era where traditional knowledge may not suffice to address such complex conditions. Based on Blessed Dew talisman, we can see that people were healed just by standing nearby Erdtree. There was no real need for doctors during the time of Erdtree, and even after the end of the Erdtree, the Age of the Golden Order started, which ultimately killed motivation for any medical research.
Ooh, I like it. Just listing out the super controversial points without any regard as to whether people disagree or not. So yeah, even though I tend to believe the same thing, I do think it's fair for me to point out that this is not necessarily guaranteed, and there's certainly a lot of room for argument to say that the Age of the Golden Order could have started with the Age of the Erdtree, with Godfrey and Marika's ascension to power, but we don't really know for sure. So yeah.
People are immortal. What is the point of cure now? One more thing that is worth mentioning is that omen are omens of what? Omen means a bad sign. But to what does it refer? The Golden Order is the perfect order, the culmination of perfection itself. Everyone is immortal. Everyone is eternal. Nothing changed. But what if some people were just born with random mutations? That is a sign. Sign that order is not perfect after all.
So, I really do like that idea for a number of reasons. I just don't know if everyone would be on board with that observation, because you could make the argument that the Omen and the Misbegotten specifically could have all been born during Godfrey's age and then traded like slaves as the Golden Order took off based on your timeline. But I do think your argument would be stronger if you believe the Golden Order first came about with Godfrey's reign as well. Adlai said, were the demi-humans respected by the Golden Order, or were they treated like Albinorics? You know, that's a really good question. And of course, a lot of that also depends on your interpretation of when the Golden Order begins. If you think it begins with Radagon, one might be able to make the argument that they shouldn't have been treated too terribly, partially because the demi-human queens did have a pact with the Carians to like learn from them. So presumably not. But to be fair, the Carians also seem to have some relationship with Albinorics, and Albinorics are not in the best state in the lands between either. Levo said, you assumed everyone believed the Golden Order came late in the timeline. It seemed like the only logical answer to you. It wasn't until a bit later that you realized some people disagreed with that. That was half a year ago. That's fine. I mean, this is part of why I do try to be mindful of like what others believe or just how much wiggle room is in the text, because it's really easy to take things for granted, which may or may not be true. So I'm always trying to double check what I believe and see if it's consistent or not, or even if my ideas are consistent, if other ideas can still remain consistent and be compatible with the text as we know it. Galaxy Dragon asks, wasn't it just fundamentalism that came with Radagon? That, again, is arguable because pretty much everything relating to the Golden Order is kind of more specifically related to Golden Order fundamentalism as we know it. So part of that is a little bit obscured by translation. So things like the Golden Order seal say that it represents Golden Order, whereas the Japanese is a little bit clearer that it's Golden Order fundamentalism. The same thing with the Golden Order Greatsword. It's based off of fundamentalism and all that manner of thing. Pretty much the biggest thorn in the side of believing that the Golden Order would have come later would be the Telescope's description, which says that during the age of the Erdtree, Carian astrology withered on the vine. It had been fettered by the Golden Order. And although it's not the most elegant solution, one could make the argument that since in his boss title plates for Japanese, Radagon is essentially called Golden Order, Radagon, that Radagon could be synonymous with the Golden Order to a degree, and therefore Carian astrology could have been fettered via Radagon's marriage to Renala in a figurative sense there. So hopefully that answers that question. And then Kyle, welcome into the stream. Again, if that's the same Kyle. Kenneth and Patches seem to imply demi-humans could be worked with. Also, Milena talks about Bach with no disgust, and Bach even gets her born, so they seem accepted. To be fair, yeah, I guess demi-humans are a little bit different than misbegotten, because I was thinking about Castlemorn and Edgar talking about the menials rebelling. So, even so, I don't think that the demi-humans may not have been treated like slaves, but I certainly don't think they're given the same status as first-class citizens, partially because of how subserviently Bach prostrates himself before the Tarnished character and how he said his mother was a seamstress. They seem to be to exist in a more of a capacity for servitude than like independence, perhaps. All right, same Kyle, sweet. Okay. All right, let's go on.
I already explained in detail why exactly the Golden Order hates Omen in my Laws of the Golden Order video.
Everyone got weaker.
Evolution is a beautiful thing, really are. Our intelligence, vitality, and civilization are all products of it. If evolution had stopped working millions of years ago, we'd be no different from monkeys today. So why?
Counterpoint, if evolution stopped that far ago, we probably wouldn't have had monkeys to begin with.
Why did I say that evolution is bad? Before I start the explanation, for the context, Souls lore is really only considered things from a pessimistic point of view. Take for example the lore of Dark Souls, which is notably darker than that of Elden Ring.
The Dark Souls Your ancestor claimed the dark souls and waited for fire to subside. And soon the flames did fade, and only dark remained.
It features the Curse of Undead, which grants human immortality by branding them with dark sign. But why is a sign that grants immortality considered a curse? Isn't that a good thing? Why not call it blessing of the undead instead? The answer, as explicitly stated in Dark Souls 2, because life itself.
That was an amazing take right there. I'm going to read that because it's on screen. I will not replay Dark Souls 2 just to retrieve footage. Here is a PvP fight instead.
As explicitly stated in Dark Souls 2, because life itself is a curse. Nothing good came from life, just suffering. And if the only good thing in life, death, is taken away, then existence becomes an eternal curse.
And there could be other arguments about the nature of life and curses in Dark Souls to consider in conjunction with that. Like, if the natural process of things is to die, then eternal life itself would be a curse because that might not even be like your original life. And paradoxically, maybe not paradoxically, but ironically enough, in a game like Dark Souls and maybe even Elden Ring, life might actually be a curse in a bit of an unironic sense. So whenever you get cursed by something, it may be because an alien life force is trying to possess your body or something along those lines. Astanek says, Dark Souls 2 wasn't the worst game they played. They found an emulator and played the Atari ET game once. Very well. I see what you're saying there. And then Javi, welcome on into the stream. How's it going? I'm not sure what you're actually saying there.
And also, the interview with IGN, Miyazaki personally talked about it. Personally, a world that is happy and bright is something that just doesn't feel realistic to me. It may sound like I have a trauma or something, but I believe that the world is generally a wasteland that is not kind to us. That's just the way I see it. Back to the main topic.
I do like how you tried to change your voice for that. You could also use a voice filter if you want to have a different effect. What you did wasn't like bad or wrong or anything. It's just me trying to give you another idea to work with in the future if you don't want to speak that way.
As I described, evolution is inherently aimless, lacking purpose, consciousness, or direction. It is chaos on its purest form. It operates on the principle of natural selection where only the strongest survive. Now, imagine if...
And I, of course, would kind of disagree with that notion and say that it's all perfectly ordered. To me, chaos would be something like magic, where it kind of fundamentally flies in the face of what we can consider to be like the natural laws of the universe or something along those lines. Whereas something that can't be predicted isn't necessarily chaotic to me because it is still following the rules and the structure of a system that we may just not have the fullest understanding of. But, you know, that's not really too important here.
Species on Earth progressed so far that competition became unnecessary. What if their medical knowledge advanced to a point where even weaker individuals could survive and have children? In such scenario, natural selection would cease to function. No, really, natural selection no longer plays the same role in modern human society as it once did. Today, virtually everyone has the potential to survive and reproduce, regardless of genetic disadvantages. Consider the scenario of a blind man born 5,000 years ago. Chances are he might have died young. Fast forward to the present day, and the same individual could simply just put the glasses on and nothing will be wrong. He could live a normal life. And I think this is a beautiful thing. I really do. But there is an obvious downside to this. People with illnesses, with bad eyesight, with weak legs, with weak immune systems just can't live a normal life. But these people...
And of course, contrary to that point, one could make the argument that these aren't necessarily genetic defects that can be weeded out through the process of natural selection by the virtue of them continuing to exist after millions and millions of years of the evolution of eyesight. So with that being said, you then might make the argument that these are just one of those random mutations that are not in favor of a species survival under like a more tooth and nail kind of paradigm. And so our status in our evolution of mankind may have evolved beyond like the law of the jungle of tooth and nail and whatnot. And now we're in a more societal based paradigm, which can kind of mitigate the more disadvantageous genetic mutations. So I think part of this just comes down to perspective. So I don't necessarily think like all of these like vision defects are just like purely bad genetics, because they've existed for an extremely long time. So anyway, that's like, splitting hairs there. So thank you, Javi. I appreciate that, even if you do disagree on a Lovecraftian level. But then I would counter with maybe you lack the insight and the eyes on the inside. Adlai says worldwide pollution affects us all, so natural adaptation is going down the drain. Not if you adapt to the pollution, bro. Just embrace the world of poop, since we're going to be talking about the Dung Eater ending. In what way? That's a facetious comment in the framework of how insight works in Bloodborne, bro. Okay. His point might be that they're random mutations, but they get cut off before they persist through the species. So if the mutation pops up again, it gets cut off again. But my point is, if it got cut off the first time, then why would it pop up again? So, of course, that's a little bit of a straw man, because there are some like diseases and things which had been like permanently removed and like will no longer spring up. Maybe that's not necessarily a genetic issue, but I don't necessarily think it's like a good or a bad thing that because humans have allowed more people to exist beyond the realm of like tooth and nail, that we're actually weakening our species. Although I can see an argument for that based off of the old like Darwinian perspective of things, even though Charles Darwin may not have felt entirely similar to that. And then True Connoisseur, welcome back into the stream.
People will have children, and their children will have more children, spreading the bad genes over humanity.
Hundreds will be reborn cursed, and they'll bear thousands of cursed children, who bear tens of thousands more.
The stronger our medical knowledge, the worse genes will be passed to the next generations. Crucible Feather Talisman further emphasizes these points. It is a vestige of the Crucible of primordial life. It was considered divine in ancient times, but now it is symbol of impurity, as civilization has advanced. Crucible, as chaos, was considered divine when civilization, which is order, was not developed enough. This reflects the problematic nature of evolution. Over time, it can lead to a weakening of the population. Evidence of this is found in the Giant Crusher description. This weapon was all but forgotten. Man has grown feeble in comparison to his forebears. Present people are unable to wield this hammer. They have grown weaker compared to their ancestor. This theme...
And of course, this is part of a matter of perspective, and we could talk about like atavistic traits, where things that the organism should have like evolved past to start like making a resurgence is a thing. But one could also argue that if the people didn't have a need for kind of supernatural strength, then it was a detriment for them to continue to grow to such immense sizes and could have cost them more resources, which is less advantageous for a society than the individual basis. And so there are many ways that all of this can be framed. So I don't necessarily think it's entirely a negative that things may have become physically weaker if they have developed socially, because what need do you have for a 500-pound body of a bear if you're facing people that can shoot frickin' space lasers out of their eyeballs? So that might be another thing to consider in the paradigm of Elden Ring.
Of diminishing strength across generation is a recurring motif in every Souls game. For instance, in Sekiro, Genichiro is portrayed as inferior to his grandfather Ishin, the Sword Saint. In Dark Souls 1, dragons were immortal beings who saw the future and lived even when the concept of life did not exist. But what evolution did to these godly creatures? They evolved into wyverns, and they evolved into drakes. Once strong and noble, and now just a pathetic beings. Dragons from Elden Ring met a similar fate. But not just dragons. Look at ancient giants' corpses. They were several times bigger than even Fire Giant, but they evolved. They become smaller, and their successors, trolls, even smaller. From Sword of Milos, we learn that some modern giants were even human-sized. Godfrey is the Giga Chat.
To be fair, I don't know how literally we should take the size of the Sword of Milos when we look at certain weapons that other enemies wield, like Godfrey. When we get the axe of Godfrey, it's not the same size as when he's wielding it, and same thing with the bolt of Grandsax. I know people like to say that, oh, you're just whittling a part of the bolt of Grandsax, which is what the description says, but it's a lot funnier, and even if it's hyperbolic, to me, to say that you don't actually wield the full bolt of Grandsax, how does it shrink down so small? So the Milos giants could have been small for a giant, but we don't necessarily know if it's entirely human-sized. But even with that being said, I'm not trying to entirely discredit Levo here, because we do have trolls also marked as giants, and they are minuscule compared to the fire giant, who itself is called a trifling, as in a small giant amongst the fire giants, which is why Marika cursed him specifically.
Itself, he led the Crucible Knights, the winner of natural selection, the culmination of evolution. But what about his legacy? Godric, the distant relative of him, is just pathetic.
And this, I mean, we might be able to say that Godric is even younger than Miquella and Melania, but I think one counterpoint to some of Levo's claims is just how powerful Miquella and Melania really are in comparison to the older demigods, perhaps Godric's the worst example. Well, they're actually still really strong compared to Mohg and Morgott. Well, yeah, that's actually probably the best case scenario for comparison, because if Mohg is older and older equals stronger, then why does he get punked by a little baby boy? Literally.
Honestly, Godric's nothing more than a jumped-up country bumpkin. Lord? Oh, don't make me laugh. He had an ugly heart.
Although, to be fair, me talking about Miquella punking Mohg does come with the benefit of having known what the DLC is like, and this video was made before the DLC, so that might be a little bit of an unfair comparison right now.
An uglier countenance, and met the ugliest of ends, eh?
Nephilim.
All right, Javi, you're throwing a little bitch fit when you shouldn't be, because I'm trying to react to somebody else's video. I'm also trying to react to like 20 other people in chat. And the question that you came at me was quite frankly nonsense. If you disagree with me on a Lovecraftian level, you're telling me you disagree with me on essentially a supernatural level. So I'm not going to take you seriously. Get over yourself. I'm going to ban you.
Also seemed to have his blood, but she was clearly nowhere near his strength or size. I can continue this list, but I think you got the point. To summarize, the inherent problem of evolution is that natural selection is not working when civilization is developed enough due to our environment which bears no danger. And because of that, people will become weaker over a long time. But there is a hope. In the second part, I will present 3 different solutions how to overcome this problem. And one of them is about Dunk Eater. I am mostly finished with it. It will be released next week. Subscribe to not miss it. Yeah, really, please subscribe. I hope you like this video. I left out a lot of information for simplicity. I didn't say anything about the huge connection between Red and Crucible, about Godskins, about Spirals and Crucible, or a little about Misbegottens. And that
Oh damn, he mentioned Spirals before the DLC happened. That would have been pretty sweet though.
wasn't the point. I tried to focus on metaphorical meanings. I really hope the video was not boring. But do not fear, the second part will be more interesting in my opinion. Thank you for watching.
Oh no, we gotta get him. He was holding off on the interesting stuff. That's a dislike and an unsub right there. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and link his video to share it with you guys in the chat. If you do want to give Levo some of that sweet, sweet support. Here you go. And then I'm going to go ahead and like it myself. And I'm already subscribed, doing my due diligence. So, Adlai will also subscribe. Sweet. Kyle says, all the children of America or Radagon seem on similar strength. Godwin bested the dragons, Radon bested the stars, Rykard tied the snake, Ronnie protects her mom, all big feats, and then Rykard gained control of a huge snake capable of devouring gods. Oh no, that's a different comment. Okay. Uzumaki ring confirmed. Speaking of Uzumaki, how'd that anime turn out? I heard like the first episode was good, and then the quality dropped off real sharply afterward in terms of like production values. So they're just trying to get you in the first half. It went bad. That sucks, because I feel like there's a lot of potential for like Junji Ito to go right. It was awful after the first episode. Hey, Mike Bailey, nice to see you again. That's unfortunate. Would you say it's like not worth watching, or is like just the first episode worth watching, or just Game of Thrones it and try to forget it ever happened? And then Stella, welcome back in. Even the first episode wasn't great. It was rushed. Oof. Okay. Literal slideshow at times. Oh man, that's awful. Randy clowned on Malakath and is both invincible and can kill the Tarnished in one hit. That's true. She's probably the strongest demigod, but long since chained by the Dark Moon's influence. Forget it ever happened. Okay. Thanks, Astanex. Appreciate that. 4 episodes weren't nearly enough to handle all of the story. That's not too surprising. So maybe it should have been like a longer OVA. Is it even considered an OVA? I guess I don't really know. So anyway, that's not too important. Thanks for the feedback on that, guys. So, okay, Levo, thank you so much for, participating in chat while we watched the first part of this video series. And then we'll probably watch your Dung Eater video tomorrow, if you don't mind. Or if you want me to save it for another day that works better for you, just feel free to let me know whether or not that's here or, in a DM or something like that. So, all right, let's go ahead and transition into another requested video with Kagare, themes of From Software 1 by Acer Aesthetics. Or is it Acer? I don't know. With the Thorn, I would expect it would be Acer, but anyway. This video contains spoilers for the extended From Software library of games. Familiarity with them is assumed going forwards. Yeah, I should probably have more of a disclaimer for that for a lot of my videos, but I don't. Ooh, it's a 4 out of 10. It's rough. Was it convincing? Do you think the Crucible metaphor as the developer planned evolution? I didn't get that statement from the video. Maybe I toned out a bit too much, maybe because of like Javi or something there at the end. So let me think about that. Probably not, to be honest, because I feel like the Crucible was a thing of later times, and the way that I tend to look at the Crucible would be that it is kind of like the opposite of natural selection in the form of evolution, and in some ways might be more akin to, I don't want to call it intelligent design because that's wrong as well. Maybe like a bit of a steroid. So if you think of a movie like 2001: A Space Odyssey, the Crucible might essentially be the equivalent of a monolith being dropped onto a planet where monkeys pick up a bone and start beating the crap out of other monkeys with their bones, essentially. And maybe that's actually a little bit more literal in the case of Elden Ring with the demi-humans and whatnot. Night Scott said, you think that some mutations tied to evolution aren't always good, and others no longer fulfill their goal or later become counterproductive, like with the Misbegotten. And that is true too, but you should remember that the Misbegotten, it's implied they shouldn't have been born with those Crucible type traits, because those are markers of devolution as far as the English is concerned, and like atavism, senso gaidi as far as the Japanese is concerned, if I'm remembering correctly, which means like atavism is when a trait that should have been evolved away from makes a resurgence for like not any apparent reason. So one of the most common forms of that in humanity are the vestigial tails that some children are born with, which is just like an elongation of the spine essentially to have like the tail stick out, but we humans don't really need tails. Omens are a curse rather than being natural like Misbegotten are, in Night Scott's opinion. Misbegotten and Crucible Knights are slighted as a way for others to literally feel holier than thou. Potentially, yeah. Stella says, do I think that it taking 2 years for the DLC built anticipation that it was never going to be entirely lived up to? Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I felt that about the base game as well, that like, no matter what they did, they're probably not going to meet everyone's expectations. Now, with that being said, I still do think that they could have done some smaller things to help flesh out the DLC to be more to my liking. But, I mean, even with that being said, there's so many people who give it a much higher score than I do that I'm not entirely sure my voice really matters too much on that front. The Misbegotten word turns their eyes red, which might be like a sign of devolution. I don't know, because the red eyes aren't necessarily limited to demi-humans and the Misbegotten, and that was supposed to be a bigger factor tied to like Frenzy or something like that in earlier parts of the development. But there is like the super strong like red-eyed banished knight ghost in Castle Soul, so there's a couple red-eyed enemies at parts in the game which are stronger and not entirely dissimilar to the random enemies that have like the red eyes in Dark Souls 3 either. So I don't know if I would entirely base that on like devolution as far as the game is concerned. Okay, you mentioned the red eyes for the spirits as well, yeah. Adlai wants Wukong to be Game of the Year? No, I'm not going to vote for it even harder now. So let's go ahead and dive on into Kegare, Themes of From Software by Acer Aesthetics. Impurity.
In Elden Ring, the Golden Order governs all, and yet there are outer gods, powers kept outside the Order's control, powers which it has expelled or hasn't integrated into itself. One of these is the God of Rot, and its manifestation in the land is the Scarlet Rot, a terraforming effect which ails the land and those who reside in it. But it's not malicious, not in a very clear sense at least. It's simply a different way for life to exist. Queen Marika, the Eternal, sealed away the rune.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that assessment there. And just to make a little bit of a crude metaphor that might not be entirely fair, I don't think most people would say that if you like dipped a side of mutton into a piranha infested river, that the piranha are malicious as much as they are just kind of acting on their base nature of consuming the meat during their like mating season and whatnot. And everybody hates the Lake of Rot except for me, apparently. Okay. Kyle asks, is this video before the DLC? That's actually a good question. Let's go ahead and check it. No, this was released last month, so this should be after it. Everything in Elden Ring seems impure? Except for the dog pope? Okay.
Of death long ago, and although she didn't know it at the time, in doing so, she ushered in an era of stagnant life. And so she enabled the rise of forces of alternate death. The Glomite Queen and the Black Flame, the Prince of Death and the Deathblight, and yes, Scarlet Rot and its cycle of decay and rebirth. The forces which gained power in the wake of the system she set up have all ingrained within themselves a solution to the stagnant life problem which Marika set in order. Some seek to fix the problem, other forces yet see the problem as an opportunity. The Scarlet Rot has latched on to Malenia. An Empyrean and a daughter to Queen Marika, she was born afflicted with a rot and was fated to one day bloom into its goddess, the ultimate emissary of the rot in the lands between. But the rot can be averted. The blue cloth cowl's item description reads, "Cowl of a nomadic warrior. The blue color of its fabric symbolizes brisk waters, as fluid and flowing as the sword in the hand of its wearer. Just as stilled waters turn foul, stagnation leads to decay. Warriors must remain ever drifting."
So yeah, I'm assuming Acer might go into this, since he's kind of based the video off of Kegare, that might go hand in hand with the theme of Yodomi or stagnation. And so the whole aspect of flow could be taken as a metaphor for like the literal cycle of life and death. And that if you stop up that cycle of life and death so that death is no longer a component, you will have stagnation in the form of life piling up and piling up and piling up, which will verbatim lead to decay according to like the blue cloth cowl set, whatever it's called. You guys know what it is. I don't, apparently.
Blue and fluid and flowing, like water, like life. The flowing curved sword's item description reads, "Legends speak of a master of the sword garbed in blue, and his curved blade that was patterned after flowing water. Strong attack unleashes a series of strikes akin to a dance, offering a glimpse into the legend. A dance which channels the power of flowing waters. To fight off stagnation, seek flow." And that is precisely what Malenia did. She was instructed by the blind swordsman, as we learn in the description of the prosthetic wearer heirloom talisman. A talisman engraved with a scene from a heroic tale, raises dexterity. Though born into the accursed rot, when the young girl encountered her mentor and his flowing blade, she gained wings of unparalleled strength. Malenia learned to fight and became one of the greatest fighters in the land. She wields the Hand of Malenia, whose item description reads, "Blade built into Malenia's prosthetic arm. Through consecration, it is resistant to rot." Malenia's war prothesis symbolizes her victories. Some claim to have seen wings when the weapon was raised aloft, wings of fierce determination that have never known defeat.
You know what, now that I think about it, I'm surprised that I never really caught on to the prosthesis wearer heirloom mentioning her gaining wings of unparalleled strength when she met her mentor, because that could imply that Malenia met her mentor, who may not have been her mentor when they initially faced each other, and she could have essentially been killed by him or like put into phase 2 essentially, where she gained those wings, I guess. So now I'm wondering if he's like literally her mentor, or if she just learned from him through battle but ended up killing him anyway, if she's Never known defeat. Now, I don't entirely buy into that. That's just kind of like some off-the-cuff thinking right there. That's an interesting theory, thanks. Made it up myself. I mean, yeah, I think that might just... I don't know how that works. It's just kind of an interesting thought, I guess. Lake of Rot is so bad, even Millennia moved to Miquella's Erdtree, and then she stunk the place up with her rot.
Consecration is the act of declaring something as holy, and the skill associated with this weapon is the waterfowl dance. A religious adherence
So those sound effects were a little bit loud in comparison to his voice.
to the way of flowing waters.
Oh yeah, and about the consecration thing, I believe Millennia's blade is supposed to be made of unalloyed gold. So I just kind of associated it more with that rather than the flowing aspect itself. And I associated the waterfowl dance more with Millennia than the blade. But to be fair, like when we get the blade, it also has the memories of Millennia essentially because it comes from her remembrance. So I don't entirely feel incorrect for saying that. Blade of Millennia? I don't remember what it's called. Of Millennia? I just want to double check what it says. Millennia's Great Rune. Hand of Millennia. Okay. No, I guess it doesn't say anything about that. Let me double check. Oh, well... Anyway, let's go back in.
Named after the aquatic living birds, waterfowl. Millennia's life is a battle to seal away the rot within, just like her master did long ago. The Blue Dancer Charm Talisman's item description tells us that story, and it reads, "A cloth doll depicting a dancer garbed in blue, an ancient heirloom of some sort, raises attack power with lower equipment load. The dancer in blue represents a fairy who in legend bestowed a flowing sword upon a blind swordsman. Blade in hand, the swordsman sealed away an ancient god, a god that was rot itself." I really love to see different cultures have a crack at exploring stories outside their own backyard. Many of the best stories come when a fresh-eyed, foreign perspective is brought in to explore the dynamic of a community, era, setting, culture, whatever, other than their own. I think it's interesting to see which standard component of the genre works are de-emphasized and which ones are amped up. I'm fascinated in seeing what gets introduced and what gets wholesale neglected. You can tell a lot about what was important to the storytellers by looking at what they did and did not do with traditional archetypes and tropes. For video games, I think one of the hardest nuts to crack has historically been Japanese games and the concept of kagare. If you've played a Silent Hill, if you've played a Siren, if you've played any Japanese horror game, or even many non-horror games, this theme may have been working its way in the background to prop up the worlds, and if you didn't know it was there, you might not have ever picked up on it and its ramifications.
And not just Kegare, there's the whole issue of like ghosts and spirits and this kind of animism that's at the heart of many Japanese games that's not exactly Shinto, but is more or less Shinto. That is kind of pervasive through a lot of Japanese content, that once you kind of unlock the hidden system behind it, will make a lot of these kind of nebulous things actually make a lot more sense and have a lot more clarity, which is kind of a little bit redundant on my part. But one example of this is when I watched a movie like Princess Mononoke in high school, before I'd ever even studied Japanese. I had no idea what the hell was going on, and I didn't understand what was going on with the forest spirits, or like the boar spirits especially. But now, after, you know, becoming a lot more familiarized with like the concepts of kagare and spirits and like animism in general as it pertains to like Japan, that kind of content has become a lot more approachable to me. And to be fair, like, the world has also become a lot smaller since then, and there are many more ways to interface with the world to learn more about these kind of systems than when I was in high school, because I'm old as hell, apparently. Forbidden Siren shout out? Okay.
No company is as synonymous with the term as From Software, so I'm going to be using their games to explore the concept. I've talked a tremendous amount about Kegare before, and I'm sure channel regulars will be very familiar with it. Also, bigger Souls tubers than myself are beginning to casually throw the word around. The cult of Kegare is spreading quite nicely. I like to think I had something to do with that. But
we're rotting from the inside.
I've never actually set myself down to explicitly write about this topic, and I've decided now to do just that, so that in the future when I discuss the term and its application in From's games, I can just direct people to this video and then move forwards, assuming everyone is in the know, rather than having to re-explain it every time just in case someone didn't watch my Shadow Tower Abyss video that one time. Even though you should have, that video was a banger. Hello. This is me, dear old Uncle Acer Aesthetics. Hope you have a cup of coffee on hand. Let's dive in.
Acer, got it.
Kegare is a Japanese term which doesn't have a perfect English translation. It's a Shinto idea, so the concept isn't one-to-one replicatable without grounding the audience a bit beforehand, but the best approximation of the term is impurity/corruption. And not either or, but both. It is a sort of corrupting defilement born from impurity, and it applies in both physical and spiritual contexts. In fact, one can lead to the other. It's important to understand that Kegare doesn't have moral considerations insofar as good people are clean, bad people get Kegare. Kegare itself is bad, and however good you might be, you can still attract the impurity, and if that happens, the good aspects of your being don't really do anything to counteract it.
Yeah, he's not exactly wrong about here, but there is a certain level of nuance where it becomes the snake eating its own tail to a degree, where he is right by saying, like, Kegare by itself doesn't necessarily have moral implications, but if somebody gets corrupted by impurity, so to speak, then that can cause their actions to become morally bad and things like that. So if somebody were to commit something like murder, that is like a morally bad action that can cause somebody to get stained with Kegare because of that. So like the Kegare itself isn't exactly bad in a kind of like Abrahamic Christian sense of the term, and it's just more or less a byproduct of an event that was bad, if that makes sense. So I'm not trying to like say what he said was wrong by any means. I'm just trying to give a little bit more context, because it's really hard to kind of get that unless you're kind of familiar with like the workings of it like implicitly.
You can be the noblest,
and yes, Levo, you need to shower, you filthy gamer.
most heroic knight who adopts puppies, and it doesn't matter. When you touch the impurity, it touches you back. It clings to you, and through you, it begins to spread. There are many sources of Kegare, but the connecting thread is the breaching of purifying boundaries. Blood and feces, for example. If you touch either, you become impure, but at any point in your life, you almost certainly have both within you. But that's their proper place. Once the boundary is breached, however, once blood or feces are smeared on walls, they become impure. And it doesn't matter how natural the breaching might be. If you defecate, you need to clean that. If a woman bleeds menstrual blood, she needs to clean that. Or even if the blood comes from childbirth, that's still impure. The child breached the boundary from womb to the world outside. The concept of Kegare is very rooted in the assumption that life ought to be orderly and that things have their proper place. You wouldn't go singing in the streets, but once you enter the karaoke bar, you can go wild. Another common source of Kegare is death. And anything really associated with death. So disease, murder, weapons, etc. If you touch a dead body, or even if you just stand in its general vicinity, you can acquire a spiritual uncleanliness. And
I know that there's a little bit of competing scholarship on the topic, but I have seen some arguments that all Kegare is essentially related to death or death adjacent. So, like, blood, although it is like the life-giving force, if you spill it, it does kind of like exist next to death. And so there's the concept of chi kagare, which is like blood kagare, but that essentially does eventually loop back into shi kagare, which is like death kagare and whatnot. And so I definitely appreciate Isur talking about things needing to be in their proper places to avoid necessarily being called kagare, because that is true, and that's something that's a little bit unintuitive, because I think one of the easiest ways you can compare the concept of Kegare to like concepts of impurity or purity in the West is the whole concept of ritual purity as it's known in Christianity and Judaism. So for those who aren't like super familiar with that term, like the concept of eating food that's kosher, it needs to be prepared in a certain way. And if you have food that's not kosher, it's impure, and that will like stain you and you'll be like morally bad. So it's not quite a moral thing to that degree in like Shinto and whatnot, which is what Isur was talking about earlier. But to just go back to the whole concept of orderliness, which is a little bit different than like ritual purity in the West. This might not be the best example, but it's one that sticks out to me. Like if you wear shoes outside and then you walk inside your house, you should take off your damn dirty shoes before you walk inside, because you're tracking in all the dirt which doesn't belong in your house, into your home, making it filthy. So that's why like taking off your shoes is a really, really big deal in many Asian households and whatnot. The Game Awards nominating Shadow the Erdtree as Kegare. Okay.
Need to clean that because it doesn't leave by itself. To purify oneself, many rituals exist, but predominantly for From Software, there's the idea of the healing properties of running water. Water comes to us from heaven, a divine gift, and it moves through the land from higher elevations to lower ones. In the process, it gathers up impurities from the land and removes them. You can stand in the flowing river and have the impurities picked away. In Elden Ring, deep beneath the lands between, the Shifra River runs, and its flow is the source of the blind swordsman's power. There's a great thread on Reddit by users.
So just to tie in the concept of water a bit more directly to Kegare as far as it goes from like a mythological standpoint, once Izanami died and Izanagi, like two of like the Japanese founding deities essentially, Izanagi tried to visit Izanami in Yomi. I almost called it Yodomi. Yomi, like essentially the underworld, the Japanese version of hell, the land of the dead or shadows, whatever you want to call it. He essentially had to flee the underworld while Izanami was chasing him. It's kind of similar to that one story where like the one hero visited Hades to try to like visit his wife who had died, but she could no longer leave Hades, or like he couldn't like look back, but he did. It's a very similar story to that in many regards. But long story short, Izanagi had to flee Japanese hell, and then once he did, he closed it off with a giant boulder. And then to cleanse himself of the filth of having visited Yomi, he needed to perform misogi, which is like water purification. So water is kind of implicitly able to remove or purify Kegare to a certain degree within like Japanese culture. Now, there's still going to be periods where you need to be like quarantined and you shouldn't bring like your Kegare anywhere else, even though you may have like performed some forms of misogi, but you know, that's a little bit nebulous and not too important for this context. But I just wanted to emphasize that within Japanese culture, water has a very important aspect in purification rituals. Orpheus, thank you, Astanex.
Nameless Singer, which talks about this, and the user makes the excellent observation that Shifra is actually pronounced Shifra, and it's an old Irish word for fairy. This fairy is the kami of Shifra River. The two are connected, and it might be from the flowing waters where the swordsman gained his power and learned how to fight back against the stagnation and rot. Under the lands between, the river runs through the underground world, and it assumably picks up and removes the impurities in its way. But the process is not endless. All rivers eventually end. Flowing waters are purifying, but still waters are a seedbed of impurities. The filth which the flowing water carries from the land is not destroyed, it's just moved. And once the river runs still, the impurity ends up there where it sinks and begins to stagnate and rot. Still waters are where parasites hatch their larvae, because they will be safe from the stream. It's where leeches are found and where rot gathers around. You step into it only if you actually think there is something to be gained in spite of or from the impurities contained within. When you encounter Kegare, it's best to avoid it. It is a natural expression of the world, and everybody will come into contact with it and create it from time to time, which is why you need to maybe periodically have a ritualistic cleansing. And if you meet someone who has it, someone unclean, maybe your best course of action is to take a step back so that you won't be wrapped up in the impurity which has seized them. Instead of seeking to understand, seek to stay in harmony with the purifying forces of the world. Keep yourself clean, pure. Don't go touching death or go inviting decay into your life. Visit your shrine from time to time. Offer up gifts to your kami or to the Buddha, because it's not just you. If you become unclean, you jeopardize your family and your friends and your community. You expose everyone around you to the impurity, and so your best course of action is to clean yourself or maybe step aside to protect those around you.
And I've talked about this in some of my videos on Bloodborne. I think when I was talking a lot about the nature of the old blood, because it's kind of directly tied into like the Cainhurst folk and Tumero, because they had implicitly impure blood and whatnot. So etymologically speaking, I've seen arguments to say that Kegare comes from ki kareru, which is essentially another way of saying that your ki gets withered. Now, the concept of ki, you might be able to translate to something like Dragon Ball Z. You know, you send Goku your ki so that way he could perform his spirit bomb. So if your spirit bomb energy is getting smothered by all of this impurity within your life, essentially, then you're going to end up having a bad time. You could get sick. You can make your family members get sick, which is why Isur is correct for pointing out that sometimes the best way of dealing with Kegare is trying to avoid it entirely. And I think in many ways this makes a lot of sense anthropologically speaking. Wait, is that the right word? Yeah. Because in let's say medieval Japan, they didn't exactly have like the germ theory of disease. And so when somebody like ran into like a rotting dog carcass on the road and they like messed around with it with their hands, and then all of a sudden they get sick and their family gets sick, it looks like the gods are pissed off that somebody was messing around with some dirty stuff, and it's a really bad thing to do. So I feel like in many ways this is kind of like a reverse engineering of like contact tracing that the Japanese did. And so that is why like Shintoism places a huge emphasis on like purity, ritual purity, which is also tied to like physical purity in many ways, and like why bathing is a huge thing in Japanese culture. So it all ties down into this metaphysical / spiritual property of Kegare that like interacts with both aspects of the world, physical and spiritual. Which is why you shower level
and orderliness are harmed when impurities are allowed to seep in. They create dangers and desperation, which makes the boundaries of the community and the world around you blurred. And when there is no order, or when the order is not strictly directed, evil influences can make their way into it and work to subvert it to evil ends. When the king dies, you replace him immediately, because the longer the power vacuum persists, the more power will flow from the throne down to hidden, shadowy rooms where priests or nobles scheme. When the Elden Ring is shattered...
I don't know how accurate that idea is, but I really like it nonetheless, that the power could leak out. That's kind of funny.
Seek to reforge it immediately. Maybe don't get too hung up on the exact makeup you want it to have, because whatever can thrive in the absence of order is surely worse than the imperfect order. right? The king is preferable to the shadowy schemers because he is seen. When power flows into the shadows, it goes wild and makes crazy things happen. And the longer the world persists without a formalized structure administered by someone, the more the world will breed horrors. So, that's Kegare. If you are only interested in knowing what the concept meant, you can turn off the video here and go do something productive with your time. Leave a like for my efforts, though. But, if you want to stick around as we dig deeper, grab yourself another cup of coffee, and let's do this.
Demon Souls.
The two most prominent examples of Kegare in Demon Souls, in my opinion, is the Valley of Defilement and the Black and White World Tendency System. The Valley of Defilement is home to all the unwanted things of the world, like the elderly. We discussed the idea of impurities flowing with water until it reaches a stagnant lake where those impurities sink, stagnate, and then rot, and that stagnant lake, in Demon Souls, is the Valley of Defilement. All impure things in this world find their way here, and from the impurities here, greater impurities still are born. I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think the concept behind the demons in Demon Souls is that
So I was wondering if he's going to bring it up, so I was like trying to hold off. But I would say that he's 100% correct on his assessment here as far as the Valley of Defilement is concerned, because the Japanese name for it is Kegare no Tani, which is the Valley of Kegare, essentially. So he's definitely right on the money there. And Mr. Yada says in all caps, "Bring back World Tendency Miyazaki! Rah!" Okay. And Nappy, welcome back in.
When King Alant resurrected the Soul Arts, he shattered the boundary separating reality and dreams. And now, those things which only ever existed in myth have been manifested as demons. So the Shrine of Storms, for example, it was home to the Shadowmen and their religion. The burial ritual saw bodies offered to the adjudicator, who would judge whether or not they deserve a sky burial or not. In the former case, assumably the bird on his head would chirp. In the latter, he'd probably just eat them. Those chosen for the sky burial were then offered to the Storm King. Another instance of this idea of people's beliefs being made manifest through the blurring of the boundaries of dreams and reality can maybe be seen in Boletaria itself. There's a story of the first king of Boletaria, Old King Doran. And what do you know? He's inexplicably alive for us to meet and talk to. People's dreams and hopes and fears persist in the periphery of the world. The souls grant men clarity.
I guess I never really thought about it that way, but that would make a lot of sense. But to be fair, I haven't really delved too deeply into the lore of Demon Souls because it's pretty bare bones, and I feel like we're not going to get much beyond a very surface level reading of things, mostly because there isn't enough meat on its bones, because it's bare bones, like I said. But no, I really do like that idea. And what else is I going to say about that? Global sequence, you love those MIDI ass horns of the Demon Souls theme. Damn it, what was I going to say? I'm drawing a blank. Let me look back. I guess I forgot. That sucks. Oh well.
Is it so crazy to think that which the clarity is aimed at should have picked up a physical resonance from the soul clarity which birthed it? And what if the old one is just this? Like the idea of evil from Berserk. The old one might not be malicious, but rather might have been born from the desires of mankind in this universe. In that case, if mankind was peace-loving and kind, the old one could be benign. But they're not. And so the old one feeds on souls until he is put to slumber.
So that's an interesting idea. I do wonder how compatible that is with the so-called visage of God, because the talisman of God is essentially depicting the old one, but I don't remember enough about Demon Souls lore to know if I would implicitly agree with this idea or not, that the nature of the old one could essentially change due to the belief about it. I mean, I guess in a macro level, it would make a lot of sense. So, right. Still can't remember what I was thinking about King Doran.
The Valley of Defilement has 2 bosses, which are manifestations of the idea of Kegare. The Leechmonger, who is an amalgamation of leeches surrounding a demon's soul. And the Dirty Colossus, who is even more abstract in that it's just assorted impurities and filth surrounding a demon's soul. If these people believe in the concept of Kegare, would it be weird that that belief would manifest as demons? The great demon of this area is Maiden Estrella. She is a member of the church who ventured here to ail all those who suffer. But she can't heal those who live here. Not quite, at least. The soul grants the mind clarity, and she removes the soul of those who suffer in the valley to render them incapable of understanding their pain or anything else. She sits in a literal pool of impurities in the bottom of the valley itself and is defended by Garl of England. He wears the dark silver armor.
The Garl of England. I gotta love the auto caption sometimes.
Which is...
Oh no, we got the Garl of England. Does that mean he and Queen America fought a couple hundred years ago?
Touted for its protective and purifying qualities. So it's quite a dark turn of events that these two would find themselves here doing what they are doing. If we take the idea of demons being manifestations of people's beliefs as canon, then it's interesting to consider the world and character tendency systems. If you've ever found yourself having trouble making sense of them as morality systems, I think it's because only one was meant to be that, the other is an impurity tracker. Kegare comes to the good and evil alike. It's not sin. It's more like having a disease-spreading piece of bubblegum on your shoe. The world tendency system doesn't check morality, it just checks whether or not you've been spreading impurities and corruption, or whether you've been removing them. And then it gives you buffs and debuffs and special events or character encounters which map onto where your tendency stands. The reason...
Yeah, and that's kind of one thing that throws people off if they try to kill Petrus in Dark Souls 1. Because you attack him, even though he's done some evil things, and you're just trying to like bring an end to that evil, the game doesn't necessarily care about why you attacked him as much as the fact that you attacked him, and so you're kind of committing a sin against him, even though he himself is a sinner. And so it's a little bit more... I don't know the best word to describe this. I don't think like egalitarian, like uncaring, I guess, might be more accurate. Where are the Garls of Wales, Scotland, and Ireland? He ate them. I don't know.
And it's interesting to consider these mechanics in the context of demons are manifestations of people's beliefs is because of the Northern Regalia. It is a composite sword made from Demon Brand and Soul Brand. The sword that makes you strong when you're closer to being a demon, and the sword that makes you strong when you're closer to being human. Its Japanese item description reads, "Old proof of the Boletaria kings." The image of this sword is Soul Brand as well as Demon Brand. Much of its origin isn't told, even in the Boletaria royal family legends, but it is regarded as having been left in the world due to malice, along with the old beast. The malice they speak about is human malice. On the first day, mankind was granted a soul to have the wisdom to understand, but some turned on their kin and devoured their souls in order to strengthen their own. And with
Is that what the opening cutscene says? It's been a minute since I looked at it, I guess.
that power came the soul arts, the ability to reshape the world. White character tendency comes to those who help others, black character tendency comes to those who help themselves. This might be why God created the Old One. Man has a choice, be good or be evil, human or demon. But if you choose demon, inevitably the Old One will be awoken and humanity will be purged from the world. The Northern Regalia was left behind alongside the Old One, because human malice exists. If there
I could like that reading. I guess I would have to reconcile whether or not the God spoken of in the opening paragraph should be understood as a different kind of deity to the Old One itself, but I think that's a pretty poignant recontextualization of the story of Demon Souls. So essentially humanity is bringing it on themselves by being evil. So it is a kind of a form of divine retribution. I like that.
There are demons.
Night Scout says, first day, God gave man a soul, and with it clarity. Second day, a soul-devouring demon was born. Okay, so that is a little bit of interpretation between the lines there. That's fine.
It can destroy demons. If you're a demon, it can destroy humans. Again, the choice is up to humanity, but God wants us to choose to be human. Black World tendency spawns the primeval demons. Vile and ugly demons who look like parasites.
Yeah, and I guess that implication is that the demons were all humans originally. I don't know if the old one would count, but you could read it that way. And of course, there is the potential that the Maiden in Black could be that demon. The old one, that is. So yeah, there might be more worth diving into with that than I initially thought.
Once the world is rotted enough, impurities seep into it. They just manifest themselves. And the only way they can be purified, in Demon Souls at least, is by destroying demons and Black Phantom invaders. To do good and purify the world. The gamification of purification in Dark Souls is not handled the same as in Demon Souls because Dark Souls doesn't have a tendency system. Instead, Kegare is shown in the lore, in context clues and environmental design, world layout, enemy design, and such. We don't really interact with the thing like we do in Demon Souls, but the idea is still very central to the game. For example, did you know that the original idea behind Firelink's Shrine was that it was a water temple? It's true. You can still see some leftover clues about it in the pool of water before Frampt arrives. And if the main area...
Yeah, I'm really glad they didn't make it a water temple, just because there's always a lot of backtracking in the water temples, and they always have the worst puzzles, and...
In the game, being Kegare coded isn't enough for you, check this out. I've made this observation in some older videos, but it warrants going over here as well. Think about my water comes to us as rain from the heavens analogy. It seeps into the earth and moves through the land. It carries impurities with it along until the water runs still and turns stagnant and foul, where the impurities stack and stagnate and rot, and become seedbeds for more impurities. Now, substitute rain with light in this thought exercise. So, light arrives from the sun in the heaven. The sun god, Gwyn, has a golden glowing city which rests above the world of men. Beneath that is Undeadburg and the other human settlements. Underneath Undeadburg is the Depths, a massive sewer system designed to move the impurities from there to Blighttown, where they are unceremoniously dumped. Deeper still, we have Lost Isolith, which is the homeworld of the demons, who are almost all of them very parasite and insectoid coded. And in the bottom of Lost Isolith, actually the lowest elevation in the game's world, if you check it out on a map viewer, is the Bed of Chaos. Or as it's properly named, in Japanese, the Seedbed of Chaos, a horrible source of demons and impurities. Other showcases of this down equals Kegare idea in Dark Souls 1 can be seen in Ulasil and New Londo. If we look just at Ulasil, for now, the humans, or Ulasilians, dug deep into the ground to find the grave of primeval man in hopes of acquiring powerful sorceries. They did this at the behest of Darkstalker Kath, and they found powerful sorceries, no doubt, but they also awoke a creeping madness within Manus.
So, Mr. Yada, I'm assuming you're being facetious, but the lore reason why the demons live in the lasagna zone is because that's where they're born from the seedbed of chaos.
The form mankind takes in this universe is perverted. These people have been twisted by Gwyn's perverting of the natural law, and because humanity's true form is suppressed, it seeks to come out, and when it does so with a writhing dark vengeance. Eudix Gundyr, Manus, this is what humans look like when their humanity finally flows over, and like with a rubber band analogy Miyazaki used to describe the transformations in Bloodborne, the more you suppress it, the more you stretch the rubber band, the more violent the transformation becomes when it hits, or the more the rubber band loses its elasticity.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad comparison at all. There's also the fact that the more that things get suppressed in Bloodborne goes, the stronger one's desire becomes, to the point that it overwhelms them and they kind of lose their rationality in the face of their desires. And I feel like that maps onto Dark Souls very well as well. So I do wish Easter gave a little bit more context as to why that pertains to humanity in the sense of rationality, as opposed to like the humanity sprite form of humanity. But either way, that is still pretty good.
Within Ulasil, Manus awaits anyone who's brave enough to face him. In Artorias, we see a brave knight who ventures into the dark but is overcome by it and destroyed. In the end, it is us who must go down there and put Manus down to stop the spread of the abyss. We talked about Firelink Shrine having originally intended to be a water temple area, but another instance of water and Kegare being tied together in Dark Souls is seen in Aldrich. Dark Souls 3 concerns itself with the failed to become Lords of Cinder. The failed to become is another reoccurring FromSoft theme, which might warrant its own video one of these days, but for the purposes of Kegare talk, these are the Lords of Cinder, or Kindling, who did not link the fire. The order of the world was corrupted by Gwyn, and the flow from fire to dark was subverted. This is the world order boundary breach at the heart of all of the horrors in Dark Souls. And out of all of the failed to become Lords of Cinder, Aldrich is probably the most interesting, and he's also the most Kegare coded of the bunch.
And I would actually strongly disagree with this, and I would argue the opposite, that these guys did in fact link the fire, which is why they are Lords of Cinder, because that's kind of implied within one of the descriptions. I would need to pull it up to talk about it a bit more. And this is, oddly enough, one of the more contentious parts of Dark Souls 3's lore, because a lot of people don't believe that Lothric linked the fire, and that's why he's failed to become a lord. But I would argue that Emma's trying to tell us, like, the duty of a lord is to return to their thrones, which is why they're failing to act as lords. So that's why we need to put them back on the throne so we could get their heat, which they have from the fire themselves, and we need to take it for ourselves. So I would argue part of the reason that we could say that they linked is because in the second phase for each of their fights, they all ember up because they have that dormant heat energy of the first flame within them. So it's like holding all your emotions till you freaking snap and yell at someone, but take into 100? Exactly, yes. Night Scott said, if Lothric already linked the fire, there wouldn't be a plot. He was avoiding the duty to link in the first place. No, so I would disagree with that, because we are told that the lords need to return to their thrones, which means they already took them before. And Lothric linked his... when you kill Lothric and Lorien, it says that Lord of Cinder slain. So he was a Lord of Cinder, and they all linked. And the reason why Lothric and Lorien have fused souls is because they linked together, which is why if you take both of their blades to Andre and want to forge the combined twin blade, whatever it's called, he says like their souls are newly rent apart. So are you sure you want to do this? Because you're going to be like fusing them together again. So they used to be two different individuals, but they linked together, and so their souls are fused, and now yeah.
His elemental affinity is deep. He likes to be submerged in deep waters. He dreams of a future of deep seas. Aldrich is the answer to Dark Souls 2. There, Aldia asks us, what if you could choose something other than light or dark? Aldrich shows us what that means. If you refrain from siding with one order or another, you don't choose a magical third alternative, you choose Kegare. A long, stagnant and impure existence. The prevailing order, or the order offered to you, might have its problems, but at the end of the day, these games are perfectly comfortable with the idea that any order is better than no order. It's more important that there is a king than it is who is the king. Of course, there's kings and there's kings. The title doesn't make you a king. This is why all of these games ask us, above anything else, to seek power. Once you have the power, you are the king. If you don't have the power, all the crowns and titles in the world won't make you a king. If we look at New Londo, the question, who is king, had a simple answer. Gwyn is king. But he's more than happy to let 4 lackeys play pretend if it keeps his humans in line. We talked about Ulasil, but New Londo, I'd argue, is a superior showcase of the idea of suppressed darkness manifested as Kegare. In New Londo, the 4 kings all bear the mark of having been transformed by the dark. There, civilization was a lot like what we've talked about in Demon Souls. Humans help each other, demons help themselves. And the dark wraiths of New Londo steal the humanity from others. This practice became deeply embedded into the being of New Londo, until the Abyss, the Kegare embodiment of the dark soul itself, I figure, started spreading wildly, and the whole place needed to be sealed up and flooded to prevent what happened in Ulasil from happening here. The idea with just flooding the place is that water can imbibe the corruption within itself. And sure, the rot may spread within it, but it won't breach the surface.
So about that, I wouldn't necessarily agree with the idea that the dark represents Kegare itself. And I would need to think more about a good counter argument to present to kind of like fully flesh out my thoughts on that. And that's fine, but anyway, Teen Sith, welcome back into the stream. How's it going? Kegare coded. Sorry he's not cooking with that one. My condolences, but right. So just to give a quick thought on why I would disagree that the dark is necessarily Kegare in and of itself would be because even within items relating to the deep, we're told that the deep was once a serene and tranquil place, and it seems to have been other conditions which caused the deep to stagnate to produce more impurities of its own, rather than being something that is implicitly impure. And I think that ties back into what Issa was talking about with the nature of people's humanity twisting due to the linking of the flame over and over and over again. So DS3 would be lacking any contemporary fire linker if Lothric already linked it. Lothric was basically bred for being kindling and exposed to the flame. Well, we're told that he is a Lord of Cinder and that all of the other lords need to return to their thrones and that they have graves, which means they died. So if you believe that Ludleth is a Lord of Cinder and he told us that he linked the fire himself, then I don't think it would be fair to say that any other Lords of Cinder failed to link. And I'll probably end up making a video about this at some point, to be honest.
A bottomless curse, a bottomless sea, accepting of all that there is and can be.
In Bloodborne, we see an elaboration on this idea that bodies of water can act as bulwarks to protect oneself from harmful influences. The Deep Sea Carol rune reads, "This rune means deep sea and grants augmented resistance. Great volumes of water serve as a bulwark guarding sleep and an augur of the Aldrich truth. Overcome this hindrance and seek what is yours." Just like how the deep waters can protect us from the Kegare within it, so are we kept from the cosmos. You can see it above you, but you can't touch it, not easily. But there are ways. The people of the Bloodborne universe find that they can directly commune with the Great Ones. Amazing transcended creatures who've achieved celestial powers but have lost the ability to bear children. If you want to reach the heights they've reached, you must first elevate your thoughts to a higher plane. Then ingest the old blood. I won't talk much about insight and enlightenment in this video, but the old blood is very important to Kegare and the idea of breaching boundaries. When you ingest old blood, your actual physical form becomes malleable. For most who endure extended binges of the stuff, they eventually reach a sort of tipping point and beasthood takes over. I go back to the analogy of a stretched rubber band which Miyazaki made that one time. The longer you stretch it, or in this time hold back the beasthood, the more deformed it will become when you let it go. This is why the biggest beasts in Bloodborne are all people affiliated with the Healing Church. Ludwig, Amelia, the cleric beasts, Lawrence, holy people can hold it back for longer. This is a transformative property of Old Blood which can turn a human into a great one, but you need to elevate your thoughts first. If you remain nothing more than a pitiful beastly human, the transformation will simply reflect that. Old Blood was sold to the Yharnamites on its medical properties, and it can heal you, it can make you feel good, but it does so by breaching the boundary of your regular human existence. And as the case is for Kegare, this invites horrors. In the blood of the Yharnamites we can find vermin, centipedes which are manifestations of mankind's impurity. FromSoft always loves to showcase Kegare with centipedes. In the blood of the Great Ones we can also find these, except there they are called phantasms. The game constantly nods to this conflict between beasthood and transcendence. See the Is versus Lauren dungeons of Bergenworth and the Healing Church, Menses and the Choir, the Bloodshot Eye versus the Black Sky Eye, etc. The game posits that transformation is possible, but it will reveal the nature of whoever was transformed. The quest for transcendence is an example of another reoccurring thing in From Software games, which is people who follow a doomed path. What dooms the transition here is the failure to elevate the mind, and the ruthless adherence to an orthodoxy imposed by a misguided institution which creates a cycle of torment for all. Again, future video topics on all those. Anyways, hunters become blood drunk after they gorge enough in the Festival of the Hunt. Infected beastly blood sprays everywhere and the stench is enough to titillate the senses. Drench yourself in it for long enough and you will tip over into a blood-drunken madness. But our hunter is blessed. We have the doll who removes the echoes of blood. In Japanese, these are the ishi of blood, or the blood will. She removes them from us and uses the malleable boundary of our being to transform them into strength. There's a purity to that, but make no mistake, leveling up here has us dancing very much on the periphery of what is and is not an act of wild impurity. In a city as far gone as Yharnam, this might be considered ritual cleansing, but even so, the connotation and the fact that we're weaponizing a short-term immunity from Kegare to grow stronger is a bit disturbing. Blood makes the body malleable, and I theorize that the Red Moon ritual has the same effect, except rather than the Kegare power of malleability and shifting boundaries being ingested, like with the blood, when the Red Moon hits, it's more like a form of light therapy. The same effect occurs, and so the physical boundary of Yharnam and its citizens becomes blurred, and citizens merge with the city itself. Their brains are being fried when the Red Moon drops, and I think there's something to be said for how the most vile, impure-looking enemy in the entire game is saved for this sequence. The One Reborn. A creature of depraved necromancy, possibly an attempt by the scholars of Menses to artificially create their own Great One. A hideous mockery of their transcended brilliance, because once again, Old Blood just isn't enough. Aside from Mikolash, the Menses scholars are, seemingly to a man, fried to death when the Red Moon drops, so they're shown to not have had the insight to survive the ordeal. And so all they leave in their wake is a hideous monstrosity sitting on the lowest elevation of Yharnam proper because yes, Bloodborne also makes the world layout follow the Kegare theme. On the bottom of the world we have the Chalice Dungeons. This is where the Old Blood was found, and rising from those is the city. The city began as an extension of the Chalice Dungeons, but at some point humanity was physically removed enough from those dungeons that they lost their connection to the Old Blood and became more sophisticated and less ghoulish and brain-dead. The lowest elevation of the city is occupied by the School of Menses. The highest elevation of the city is home to the Choir. Menses tries to brute force for transcendence with the Old Blood, but the Choir believes in the teachings of Master Willem, and instead they focus on meditation towards enlightenment first. In Upper Cathedral Ward, where the Choir resides, and all throughout the city actually, we can see the Astral Clock Tower, and in the Old Hunters DLC we actually visit the place. This is the true highest elevation in Yharnam, and once we exit it, we're in the dreamland version of the fishing hamlet. Interestingly, an actual body of water now separates the hunter from the city beneath them. Great volumes of water serve as a bulwark guarding sleep and an augur of the Aldrich truth. Overcome this hindrance and seek what is yours. The Aldrich truth resides in the nightmare. Having breached the body of water, we are now free to ascend even higher. In the Orphan of Cos boss arena, we see sails and sunken ships. Above this nightmare, in the Nightmare Frontier, we see those sails in the fog, and the Nightmare Frontier is the frontier of the Nightmare of Mensis. The frontier is played with us descending to the Amygdala boss arena, but the original plan, earlier in development, was for us to walk from that place to the cave we now start in, which was intended to be the same cave as the one at the start of the Nightmare of Mensis. So it's a constant climb upwards, because enlightenment brings you closer to the sky and cosmos, whereas beasthood makes you low. Rain arrives from the heavens as a divine gift, but its life cycle, in Kegare terms, ends with it pooling and stagnating in a lower elevation. A potential final horrible commentary Bloodborne makes is the idea that enlightenment is for suckers. The Great Ones lose their ability to have children, and they are overcome with the desire to do just that. They aren't really Lovecraftian unknowable monsters from beyond, they're very understandable. The game was developed after Hidetaka Miyazaki had his first child, and you can see how parentage was clearly on his mind during the development of that game. However majestic they may look, however powerful they may be, the Great Ones spend their lives in communion with mankind trying to have children. But they can't. They don't have any offsprings, they are genetic dead ends. In the Great Ones, life stagnates, and stagnation leads to rot. And those who try to achieve transcendence also stagnate. Willem and the choir try to meditate their way there, try to elevate their thoughts before ingesting the old blood, but it doesn't work. Willem has actual lumenwood mushrooms growing on his neck because he's beginning to stagnate and his body is becoming a seedbed for rot. His mind seems to be gone already, so all his time looking at the moon hasn't done him any good in his life. The choir try to meditate as well, but when the red moon hits, they fry all the same as the Mensis cult does. And those who transform might look more majestic, but there's a hidden horrible mockery even there. The blue-eyed scourged beasts are just scourged beasts. The mind flayers are just snakeheads. Their heads are host to a phantasm instead of a vermin, but does the distinction really matter? In Bloodborne, it seems the pursuit of transcendence only leads to degeneration, stagnancy, rot, and decay. And the same can be said.
All right, I'm glad he's finally starting to get to that point, because I have like a ton of notes that I want to address, but didn't necessarily want to head anything off, because I have like a lot of subtle disagreements that I will need a lot of time and context to set up, and then I didn't want to like lose the pace of things here. So it looks like he might almost be done with the Bloodborne section, so I will let him finish that off before I get on a long-winded soapbox tangent. So Polyester Pimp, welcome back into the stream. How's it going?
Degeneration, stagnancy, rot, and decay. And the same can be said for Sekiro.
Alright, so on this point I have a lot of kind of minor yet pretty major disagreements or things that I would want to recontextualize in the vein of Bloodborne. So let me just put it on like a Bloodborne image for a second. And then I'll go back to the Sekiro section later. So right. Let me start. Vermin versus phantasms, beast versus kin dichotomy. So this is one thing that I think a lot of people fall into, what I would call a false dichotomization between beast and kin, or like beast and great one, or like enlightenment and beasthood, I guess. And while there certainly is a push and a pull between these two forces, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. And we look at great ones like the Moon Presence, which is supposed to be elevated much further beyond humanity, and it kind of leaps around like a beast and snarls like a beast. that might hint as to the kind of tragic nature of transformation into a Great One, and there might not be as much which divides the Great Ones from beasts as we are initially led to believe. Now, with that being said, there's a lot of undercurrents of Kegare that run through the entirety of Bloodborne that take a lot of context to set up. So he had mentioned some things like the echoes of the Wills of Blood and whatnot, but one thing which he failed to mention, which can really help recontextualize what we know about Bloodborne and everything, is that Cold Blood itself sounds much more disambiguated from what you would get with the Japanese text. So Cold Blood can make it sound like an alien type of blood, which kind of potentially ties into the Lovecraftian elements of the Great Ones. So that can make them feel a bit more foreign than what might be implied if we looked at Cold Blood through the Japanese lens of the term, which is essentially death blood or dead blood. So what you're essentially doing is partaking within the blood of the dead to gain a high on life, a will which will sustain you, because will is your HP in Bloodborne. So by drinking the blood of the dead, you get invigorated with excessive willpower, which keeps you alive and able to sustain what would have normally been mortal or grievous injuries. And that could tie into like the whole dream thing, and whether or not the player's a dream is, you know, a separate discussion to be had there. But built within the cold blood itself, the death blood, there is an implicit understanding that it's impure because it's related to death specifically. And of course, like, blood in itself is kind of kagare and impure to begin with, but there's that extra element of death that's associated with the blood, which is like extra impure or dirty blood to an extent. And then that gets fleshed out even more, pun intended, I suppose, when you look at characters like the Great One Odin and Ariana and Adela and their plight, because the Great One Odin is a Great One that exists virtually in voice and in blood alone, and he was able to have an arcane liaison with Ariana precisely due to the impure nature of her blood, which is why she goes on to birth a goofy baby that gives us a third umbilical cord, which will allow us to take a step on the path to enlightenment and becoming a Great One for ourselves. So there's this really interesting dichotomy within the power framework of Bloodborne, where the path to divinity is taken through the profane. And so in order to kind of elevate oneself beyond humanity, you need to soul yourself to the point you're no longer like human, which will allow you to leave your humanity behind to potentially become something greater. But there is that divide between elevating oneself versus falling down completely into depravity and like becoming a beast and falling prey to one's own inner instincts and wanting to kill and consume. Sakura, your favorite drink? Okay. You didn't know about that? Yeah. So if you guys are really curious about this, I would, toot my own horn here and recommend my videos about the Old Blood and the Eldritch Truth in Bloodborne, where I really go into quite a bit of depth about these two topics specifically. Now, part of the way that this ties back into the whole Kegare thing is when you take that whole fluid metaphor and about how elevation and stagnation alters the effect of Kegare and allows it to settle and become like worse, where things like vermin can breed. That might help explain why you get vermin in the Bloodborne context with like the centipedes. Then I don't necessarily want to go into the phantasm things. I might make a video about this in the somewhat near future because I've been putting it off for too long. And I've been thinking about this before even watching this video, by the way. So anyway, I'll leave the phantasm stuff alone, but I'll say that there's probably a little bit of a different process going on there, which might not entirely be related to humans. So another big motif in Bloodborne, which is really subtextual, is that the Hunter's Mark, which kind of looks like an upside down Y symbol, or like the Algi's rune, but upside down, the rune of death, YR, I think. is essentially the depiction of a hanged man. And now that I think about it, it's probably a little bit better if I just show you guys, because I have the ability to do that. Okay. I think this should be good. All right, perfect. Let me pull my browser back up and everything. So this is a bunch of different representations of what is essentially the Hunter's Rune, the Hunter's Mark. And when you look back through time and you go into the Chalice dungeons, you can kind of see this version of the Hunter's Mark and this one kind of looking more humanoid. So this like has a head and like 2 arms. This one seems to have like more of a torso. And then this one seems to correspond to like an actual person hung from a stake. And you can kind of see this effect going on within the Hunter's Rune itself. So what I tend to make from this is that this formation, this symbol, might be meant to represent putting a body upside down and letting the blood drain from it, which might have some connections to how the moon presence drains bodies of blood, which is why the Miyazaki interview with Famitsu, if I'm remembering correctly, was called Drained of Blood. And so the ancient Sumerians may have discovered dead blood, cold blood, from hanging people and allowing their body's blood to rush out, and that which did not clot became known as death blood, and they may have imbibed it, and then they may have felt a little bit of that rush of the spirits dormant within the blood to gain that extra willpower, that vitality, that life that was more intoxicating than alcohol for Yarnamites. And so over time, the more they imbibed of the blood of the dead, the less human they became, and something happened. The Sumerian civilization was no more, blah, blah, blah. Canehurst, Yarnum, Bergenworth, they go back down into the tombs. They discover the old blood. They start imbibing it, and then things go wrong because nobody has any idea what the hell is going on in that game. So Adlai says, aren't we impure by becoming a great one? We do consume Odin's umbilical cord to become one. It's not necessarily guaranteed that we have to consume Odin's umbilical cord, but I would argue that yes, we become impure, but there's a little bit of a difference because that which is holy is simultaneously profane in Bloodborne. So you kind of transcend it through a path of impurity, which might be related to what we would call the left-hand path in certain religions. So rather than following the orthodox right-hand path of doing good and living a virtuous life and avoiding vice and temptation, another potential way some believe that they could reach divinity or an enlightenment is saying, screw all that, I'm just going to do the most vile stuff imaginable, and then through this kind of spiritual experience I will understand the depths of depravity fully, and that will allow me to transcend depravity itself back into a looping status of holiness. Now, obviously we don't know the truth value of such claims, but that is certainly a thought that exists, which might play into Bloodborne, and that might also explain why in FromSoft games a lot of the things which transform tend to have much larger left arms than right arms. So Manus is guilty of this, the Cleric Beast / Lawrence is guilty of this, but that isn't a surefire sign of things and whatnot. Teen Sith says, you'd say the Hornsent revisit some of these ideas about Kegare and transcendence, and I would definitely agree with that, especially in relation to that idea of divine invocation. So in Bloodborne, we have the divine invocation essentially being located within the realm of blood, because spirits are kind of trapped within blood essentially, even though they aren't called that explicitly. It's kind of made explicit in the fact that ritual blood has skulls popping out of it. So let's go ahead and show the ritual bloods. So this is normal ritual blood. We're told that this is what hunters imbibe because it's essentially old blood. And then the more concentrated the ritual blood becomes, the more spirits we see coming out of it. And I would call these the echoes of blood, the blood echoes, essentially the dying wills of blood. And so that is something that Aesir didn't cover quite as well as he could have. That the term blood echo does mean like the will of blood, but will in this instance means the will of something that's died. It's like their last wishes, their last desires, their last will and testament, which is kind of really amazing to me that it's a little bit of a coincidence that we have homophones in English that work the same way as the homophone in Japanese does, because ishi can mean like will as in volition, ambition, not like ambition, but wanting to do something. And ishi can also mean will as in like the last will and testament type idea, the same way that it works in English where like I will do this, or that's their will, you know? So yeah. Hey Gigantosaurus, welcome back in. Mikola discarding the body is removing Kegare to become pure. No, yeah, that is the idea. I thought that was explicit, maybe. I mean, obviously they don't say Kegare, but that is pretty much what Ymir posits. He wants to overcome the quote-unquote madness of his bloodline, so he's abandoning everything, which like goes back into the whole like ritual purity, perhaps. Considering Mohg's practices and Ansbach attacking Mikola, abandoning the physical body might not have been Mikola's preference. I mean, he won in both cases, didn't he? So I think that was his preference once he realized that he could, like, I don't know what's going on with Mikola, because it's like, why the hell does he abandon the Erdtree plan? Maybe Millennia ruins it with her rots, but we're never told anything about that. Why does he abandon his plan with the Eclipse? Who knows? It just really sucks and it's really frustrating. Someone get that boy some Adderall for real. Yeah, okay, so what else is going to talk about? Let me look at my notes on the stream. Okay, elevation, hanged man, see... Oh yeah, drip, drop, plip, plop. Perfect. Okay, so going back to that whole aspect of the hanged man and the liquid, the blood pouring from it, and them getting like the cold blood, we have this idea of impurities seeping deep down, drip down, deep below the bottom of the sea, and that gets referenced really beautifully, in my opinion, when you go to the research hall and all the big head patients keep talking about the dripping sound of water. Even though their heads are filled with water, there is a dripping coming from within them, which is potentially the impurities settling beneath them, which allow them to transform potentially into something greater. And of course, there could be like a bunch of failures along that path, aka the living failures, but eventually they might succeed to become something like the celestial emissaries, perhaps. So going back to the whole beasthood kin dichotomy here, it does seem that you do need to have some sort of a marriage between having a physical vessel strong enough to withstand the horrible effects of a transformation, as well as the mental fortitude to retain to one's willpower and not lose it to depravity to kind of become a truly elevated great one. And with that in mind, we don't know if the hunter is a success beyond all other successes that we've seen so far in the childhood's beginning ending, the one where you become a great one, or if we've essentially become no better than the moon presence itself and will doom the world to repeat the cycle of the hunt eternal, because we're essentially no different than the moon presence, just as though we would be no different as Gehrman's apprentice / replacement in the second ending, and the first ending being just a big old cycle. So that one is definitely up to more individual interpretation. So nonetheless, I really do like that whole idea of impurity and liquid meshing well together, because Quicksilver, aka Mercury, plays a really big important role in Bloodborne as being a kind of medium which will allow blood to work in other contexts. And my headcanon for this, as like all of this is essentially my headcanon, I meant to preface that earlier, is that because Mercury is a liquid metal, it is therefore like the heaviest liquid that there is, which is why Mercury has so many I don't want to say parallels or like adjacent features to impurity in general, but it just has so much closeness to it, metaphorically speaking here. I said Depsy? Oh no. I must have really said it when we got 3 people quoting it. All right. Now, Great Ones want children, and they want to return to humanity, ? Great One stagnation equals seedbed. So I do like Easter's point here that once the Great Ones ascend, what do they want? Children. And that could essentially be a psychological hint that the Great Ones might regret transformations into becoming Great Ones, or they might want to regress into being something human. And that might also paint a picture of, if transcending humanity means leaving your humanity behind, is that a good thing? Arguably not, if the Great Ones want to regress back down to humanity, or regress back down into a state of being able to have children again. And there's a lot of points to be made about Great Ones and children, and whether or not the reason why Great Ones can't have children is because they've essentially given up their own childhood to become what they are. And so is the child of a Great One essentially just that Great One rebirthing itself? Would be one thing that I would ask, although that might not make a lot of sense without further contextualization, which I don't want to get too far into here because it just takes a lot of time to go and whatnot. Oh, it's the text on the video. I'm a little bit blind. Well, I just wasn't looking at that. Thanks. That's funny. We got him. So let me catch up. Why was Koss able to carry the orphan? Did she, though? She didn't actually really birth the orphan as much as it was a forced birth. And I do have a video about the Orphan of Koss and its name, which is kind of interesting, because rather than using a more modern term to describe an orphan like Koji, they use a more they use a more archaic form of the Ghost no Ishi, which Ishi does mean orphan, but it's a cognate with cognate's not the right. It's a homophone for what I was talking about earlier, like the will of blood, Ishi, Chino Ishi, or like the last will and testament type Ishi, even though it's not literally a last will and testament, just kind of the similar idea, versus the Ishi of Koss. So does that mean that the Orphan of Koss is simultaneously her orphan, her Ishi, and like her will, and like her echoes, I guess? Or is he just purely her orphan? I think that's like left up to individual interpretation. It kind of sucks that we don't really get that kind of layering of depth in the English, but I mean, there's absolutely no way you could make that work in a localization. So that's a really good question, though. Her will, yeah, her will force. That's probably the better way of saying it, will force. So like will force versus like will and testament versus orphan. Potentially, Adma, yeah. So the Orphan of Koss could be a manifestation of her will and feelings, and that could tie back into how the Baneful Chanter guy talks about returning the Orphan of Koss to her mother, and a bottomless curse, a bottomless sea, accepting of all there is and can be. So, okay, I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to talk about with Bloodborne. Without Horn says, is the will of the blood the same reason why Omen blood is cursed? Like it's the spirits of the dead giving Omen extra life? So I cannot say that for sure. That is kind of my idea, that when things get cursed in a FromSoft game, they're actually being infused with an excess of life that is not the original life of the organism. So when you think about the wraiths, they are certainly kind of external spirits which go around chasing things, and they haunt the Omen itself. And it's kind of awkward to haunt oneself with themselves unless they're like schizo, I guess. So that tends to make the most sense to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean I am definitive on that front or correct. Levo says additional genes. Yeah, so even like the additional genes, it like the Omen could essentially be like possessed by animal spirits for all we know. I kind of doubt it because there does seem to be a bit of a difference between animals as far as like their spiritual representation in Elden Ring versus like humanoids, but I don't know. I guess we do get demi-humans and misbegotten, but we don't exactly get like deer, do we? I need to look at the Spirit Ash list. Mr. Yada isn't schizophrenic. You just have ghosts in your brain. I almost said Blaine. So, okay, do we have any more questions before I go into the Sekiro portion of the video? And just to give like a little bit of another like disclaimer as far as like Easter's claims here, I'm not trying to like dunk on him or saying that he's wrong. I think his video so far has been really, really good. I'm just trying to add more additional context, I think, to strengthen the points that they're trying to make as well. So with that being said, I have enjoyed what we've seen so far. Sorry about that. The dog started like hacking up and I had to make sure she was all right. She is. So what was I just saying? Yeah, I was just trying to fill in extra context that I think Easter can get to, which is no fault of their own. So, okay, let's go into the Sekiro portion of the video.
Sekiro's story is all about immortality and the horrors inflicted upon the land of Ashina by the pursuit of it. The enemies here want the immortality of the dragon which Kuro, the heir to the dragon's heritage, bequeathed to us. The dragon's heritage comes from the divine Sakura dragon. So let's look at another world map, eh?
Hell yeah, calling it the Sakura dragon instead of like the divine dragon.
Okay. The Sakura dragon rests on the highest elevation in the world and is literally in a cloud where rain comes from. It lands in Fountainhead Palace, which has a massive waterfall. The land of Ashina has a river running through it, which derives its water from Fountainhead. Lower elevations have unholy and stagnant creatures and environmental designs. We've done this dance twice over in this video, I assume you get it. The swimming sections often have headless for us to fight. They stand in the bottom of those bodies of water and are impure warriors. In Mibu village, very low elevation game here, we swim in the water to discover the remains of the inhabitants who indulged in the rejuvenating sediment. They ate the sand and dirt which pools in the bottom of the stagnant body of water. The tears of the dragon grant immortality, but the waters emanating from its heavens also have rejuvenating properties. But once those waters run still, the properties are transposed onto the sediment it rests on. Of course, that is not why the Mibu villagers indulged themselves. They were fed sake and then had to quench their thirst by drinking from the lake. Another showcase of a corrupted immortality born from an evil experiment can be seen in the Senpu monks.
So, I haven't really looked at the Japanese of Sekiro very strongly, but I know Shitani from Shitani's Lair has definitely done that. I'm going to go ahead and link her website here real quick. If you guys are more curious about like the Sekiro side of things as far as like translation stuff goes. But, I stopped paying attention, so I'm going to need to back up the video because when he said Mibu, that kind of like rung a bell in my head because I thought Mibu had some relation to water as far as like it was written etymologically. So from the link that I just shared with you guys, Mibu, as far as the village is concerned, is written with the character of water and life. So it's kind of funny that the village name itself is like life water essentially, but there's like a lot of water imagery in Sekiro, and so I'm glad that Acer is covering some of it. And I do have some other thoughts with like the Sakura dragon being in the Fountainhead, or whatever it's called in English, and the fact that there are so many cherry trees there, which are like sakura trees, and whether or not it should be considered a parasite. And then I didn't know this, I don't think, but Night Scout said that in the internal file names, the divine dragon's name is the Ningyo dragon. So I wonder if that's supposed to be taken from the myth of a carp that climbed up a waterfall and became a dragon. I don't remember if that was a Ningyo story or not, but it would... Now I'm wondering, I'm like, is this mermaid or is this puppet? Anyway. Ningyo notably don't have souls and be considered cursed in folklore. Yes. So the Ningyo isn't related to the waterfall carp. Okay, I didn't think so. I was just kind of wondering. So that one is the mermaid. Okay. That makes sense. It's soulless. So I'm gonna back up the video so I can pay a little bit more close attention, since I'm not like looking up kanji.
River running through it, which derives its water from Fountainhead. Lower elevations have unholy and stagnant creatures and environmental designs. We've done this dance twice over in this video. I assume you get it. The swimming sections often have headless for us to fight. They stand in the bottom of those bodies of water and are impure warriors.
I always forget, like, what's the Valley of Defilement called in Sekiro? I mean, it's pretty much the same, but it's not.
In Mibu Village, very low elevation game here, we swim in the water to discover the remains of the inhabitants who indulged in the rejuvenating sediment. They ate the sand and dirt which pools in the bottom of the stagnant body of water. The tears of the dragon grant immortality, but the waters emanating from its heavens also have rejuvenating properties. But once those waters run still, the properties are transposed onto the sediment it rests on. Of course, that is not why the Mibu villagers indulged themselves. They were fed sake and then had to quench their thirst by drinking from the lake. Another showcase of a corrupted immortality born from an evil experiment can be seen in the Senpu monks. They have centipedes, living within them which reanimate them after death. The monks murdered many children to try to artificially create a new dragon's heir. There's a lot of messed up experiments in this game because everyone is clinging to life, and a prominent idea expressed in Sekiro is that immortality is parasitic. Nobody gets a free ride. Everyone who lives forever does so by feeding off of somebody else. The pot noble wants to become an immortal.
And of course that ties back into like Bloodborne with the whole like blood echoes, because you're essentially eating the dead to become essentially closer to God. And that kind of literally makes you a demon as far as like the Demon Souls cosmology is concerned, which ties back further into Demon Souls, because the more souls you ate, the closer is the better word, the closer you became to the actual nature of the old one, which was the face of God for the people in that game. So building off of that, I was a little bit surprised they didn't point out the sediment in that part of the video here.
The properties are transposed.
That you've got like these little parasite-looking things.
Sediment it rests on.
These,
of course, that is not why the Mibu
phantasm-looking like things that people might have been eating, and that could have also tied into the rejuvenating waters keeping people alive longer than they should have. I don't remember enough of Sekiro's lore specifically to remember the ins and outs of every little thing, unfortunately, but if I remember correctly, you can kind of see these weird parasite eel-looking like things in the marriage shrine right before you go up to the fountainhead on the Shimenawa guy, like the walking straw man.
Villagers indulged themselves. They were fed sake and then had to quench their thirst by drinking from the
Sunken
lake.
Valley, I remember now.
Another showcase of a corrupted immortality born from an evil experiment.
All right, and so the whole eel thing, I forgot to explain its importance, would be that if these eels were like from or drinking the divine waters and whatnot, they could have like been the seedbed for immortality that other people could have started to consume. And the waters of the Fountainhead Palace do flow downhill, as Easter's been saying, and they all get like stagnated in the corrupted valley or sunken valley and everything. And that's where we get things like the centipedes, which the monks used to give them their own form of immortality. So the centipedes, themselves are immortal from the rejuvenating waters coming from the fountainheads originally, but it's like a twisted form of immortality, which the monks are then putting into themselves. So it's like an extra Kegare form of something which was originally holy, I guess.
Can be seen in the Senpu monks. They have centipedes, living within.
Sorry. And then the whole like eel thing, I think, does tie back into what we're kind of shown in the fishing hamlet in Bloodborne. When you look at the barrels within the fishing hamlet, they have very similar phantasm looking like things to the eels on the riverbeds in this game.
Within them, which reanimate them after death. The monks murdered many children to try to artificially create a new dragon's heir. There's a lot of messed up experiments in this game because everyone is clinging to life, and a prominent idea expressed in Sekiro.
And for what it's worth, the way that the monks are trying to make the divine child was different than the form of immortality that they gave themselves. So that may or may not be too important, but I think it's important to keep in mind.
To artificially create a new dragon's heir. There's a lot of messed up experiments in this game because everyone is clinging to life, and a prominent idea expressed in Sekiro is that immortality is parasitic. Nobody gets a free ride. Everyone who lives forever does so by feeding off of somebody else. The pot noble wants to become an immortal carp, and to do that, he has us hunt down other carps for him. The dragon elders feast off the youth of others. The centipedes are parasites which live in the host bodies, and the dragon's heritage, our immortality, is also parasitic because we're leeching the ambient life force around us to recover our vitality.
Yeah, I'm glad he brought that up. I was a little afraid that he wasn't. So, like, the reason why everyone gets sick when we die is because we're essentially stealing their health.
That's what the dragon rod is. Every time we die, we spread kagare. Then we revive by stealing life from others, over and over again. So maybe it's a good idea to make some offerings to the Buddha in order to try and address the uneven scales we leave in our wake. Script-wise, Sekiro is probably the tightest story we've gotten from modern From Software, the Miyazaki-era FromSoft. Its scope is narrower, and it doesn't have as many wild rabbit holes of lore to dive into, but all of the themes are so tightly interconnected here that the stylistic difference in the presentation of the story, compared to a Dark Souls, really makes the change worth it. There are certain things the game isn't very good at, which a game like Dark Souls excels at, but when it comes to actually connecting the underlying themes of the areas into the larger narrative and making it land, I think Sekiro showcases the best scenario for the sniper fire precision approach to story.
Yeah, and with that being said, I would say that Sekiro does the best job of helping give a greater context for what's going on in the other FromSoft games. By the way, Kuro speaks about stagnation and dragon rot, because before this was kind of written plainly in English, it would have been a really difficult thing to try to explain to people as far as like these themes existing in previous games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne. And now we can use this as a framework to like look forward into games like Elden Ring, and vice versa. We can use a game like Elden Ring and its treatment of soap to look back at these previous games and give us another piece of that puzzle that we may have been missing.
When it comes to the Gatling gun spray everything everywhere approach, however, Elden Ring is by far the best. And not for any other reason than it just has so much more content packed into it. The stories fold in on themselves so often, and the whole package is just brimming with material. Elden Ring is like Dark Souls in that the fundamental order of the world has been uprooted and people are being left to languish in an extended transitional period from one order to the other. Kegare manifests everywhere we look, and it will continue to do so until a new order of the world is established. Unlike Dark Souls, however, the transition isn't linear. Elden Ring doesn't decide for you what the next order will be, it simply asks that you grow strong enough to push aside all other claimants to the throne so that you can impose on the world whatever order you want.
And to be fair, that's essentially no different than what's in Dark Souls 2.
Some are exciting new horizons, others are monstrous depravities. Sekiro has NPC stories, but it didn't really hang an entire thematic exploration on them nearly to the extent that Elden Ring does. I like the Bodhisattva stuff just fine, but it's a far cry from something as malicious and twisted as the Dung Eater. The flow of life in the lands between has been altered to suit the tastes of Queen Marika the Eternal. Death has been eradicated, and so rather than passing on, those who succumb will be...
It's a little bit ironic that he says death is eradicated when he shows footage of Blackguard literally dying at that exact same moment.
Reborn at the foot of the Erdtree. This cyclical resurrection is a core component of the structure Marika has imposed on the world, and Dung Eater seeks to weaponize this structure to spread his seedbed curse. He hates the Golden Order, and he defiles corpses to spread his curse in them, to ensure they are reborn with his curse and will spread it among their offspring for eternity. This is the sort of wild malice which Elden Ring can do with an easily missable NPC. This is the sort of NPC which Elden Ring's free-flowing and open-ended structure allows for. Sekiro's narrative being more focused means this guy might not fly. Might, but probably he's a better fit for a game like Elden Ring. Sekiro and Elden Ring both explore the ramifications of a world without death. In Sekiro, we strive to find the Mortal Blade, a weapon capable of bringing death to the immortals. Immortality is parasitic, and to cleanse the land of Ashina, the immortality of the dragon must be revoked, and the Sakura dragon returned back to its home. In Elden Ring, we travel to find the Rune of Death, and we find it in the form of a sword, wielded by Malekith the Black Blade.
You know what? Comparing the Mortal Blade, or whatever it's called, to the Black Blade of Malekith, I think is a pretty ingenious move.
For Kegare, life and flow are synonymous, and death and stagnation are synonymous. Eternal life sounds like a blessing, but it is stagnant. The reason the Sakura dragon in Sekiro is the Sakura dragon is because the cherry blossom is symbolic for impermanence, something whose beauty can only be appreciated for a short time. And that's life. It's beautiful because it ends. It is a good thing in Sekiro that we bring death to the land. We are freeing it from the cursed stagnation it's been afflicted with. And the same applies to Elden Ring. Death indiscriminate is a blessing because the alternative is stagnation, a life that is rotted. Because death was removed from the Elden Ring, life becomes stagnant, and because the Elden Ring was shattered, the structures governing life, harmony and such have all been undone. And instead of a firm monarch, it is the outside influences who have claimed a stake at the throne and battle each other out to see who will reign supreme.
Night Scott says, the two blades in Sekiro have the same colors as Black Flame and the Rune of Death. Now I wonder if that's a bigger theme that I would need to look back at with like Dark Souls. And now I'm like wondering about like Frida's Black Flame, and maybe it's not too relevant, at least for the extended FromSoft catalog. So that still might be important as far as like Sekiro and Elden Ring are concerned. So I might need to think about that more.
Some fight with martial might, others use cunning, and other forces still are something harder to comprehend. The lack of formalized structure allows for impurities to seep in and corrupt the world. Some try to preserve the broken old order, others try to build something new. But everyone is doing their best in the wake of incomplete power, and so everyone is filthying their hands with impurities to fix the situation. To impose order, you maybe need to get your hands dirty. Prayer order is the one that lasts because once order is imposed, the fighting ends and your job is to make the world clean. Arguing about where authority gains its legitimacy or what component of the Golden Order ought to be represented or emphasized is fun and all, but the name of the game is gaining power. Gain power and use that power to get your throne. And you might not need to worry too much about how unclean the path to the throne is, because no one will have a clean path, and by the time your order is established, you can decide retroactively what was and what was not a breach of the boundaries of the world.
And so with this video made a month ago, I'm curious if he's going to try to bring up Miquella in relation to that aspect of a so-called cleaner path. And if not, that's not that big of a deal, because even if Miquella himself isn't like directly sullying his hands, he certainly has blood on his hands because of his followers like Leda, although that kind of might only really happen after he divests himself of his Great Rune, I guess. Levo says, you don't think that's relevant because of the color change in Malekith's flame from 1.0. Even so, I still think it might be worth exploring whether or not red and or black, especially flames, represent like death or severance of immortality as a larger theme in some of the FromSoft games. And Night Scott is correct that they only became purple flames when you could parry them with the Blasphemous Claw. So instead of like glowing gold like it does now, they were like purple.
So if you steal a cocooned and hibernating Empyrean and feed them with corrupted blood to make him an Empyrean emissary of the unseen god of blood, go for it, man. Moke intends to act as Miquella's Elden Lord.
Mooch. The script was written before the release of the DLC. Ah, okay. The Miquella story has changed, but the thematic ramifications of the lore as discussed here still applies to the exploration of Kegare and Elden Ring. Okay. Ooh. Interesting. Okay.
But first, he needed to corrupt Miquella. Moke and his brother Morgott are both Omen. Demigods, yes, but they're born with powerful blood which carries the spirit of the Crucible within it. The Crucible is a primal and chaotic fountain where all life comes from, unstructured and wild, and Omen are throwbacks to that primal source. They grow horns and tails and wings and fangs and the like. Moke and Morgott are both defined by their understanding of themselves in the world they live in, considering the blood that flows through their veins. Moke embraces the blood, Morgott is repulsed by it. He goes mad when we injure him in the fight on the throne balcony and cover the area in his blood. Moke, however, embraces the blood, he communes with it and gains power from it. That power is how he intends to create his new dynasty. Kegare can be born from the crossing of sacred boundaries. Morgott constrained the blood within himself, but Moke expels it to fight. He has completely accepted the new god of blood, and the boundary of inside versus outside the body means nothing to him. This is a defilement of the natural way of things, and so Magwyn, his home, is understandably one of the most impure places we can find in the lands between. One of, but not the most. I began this video by telling the story of Malenia, the blind swordsman, the Kami of Shifra River, and the power of flowing water. Rot will be born wherever there's a transgression against the sacred boundaries of the world, and wherever impurities are not cleaned up. By channeling the power of flowing water, the blind swordsman sealed away the god of Rot. By channeling the power of flowing water, Malenia sealed within herself the goddess of Rot. But the rod has not been destroyed. You can contain it, but to destroy it you need to actually purify the land, and in Elden Ring there is only one way. It's the same way we cleanse Ashina in Sekiro. We must deliver death back into the natural cycle, such that the abnormalities which are born from overly extended life can be averted. In Dark Souls, Gwyn's overextended Age of Fire was a seedbed of impurities. In Demon Souls, the Valley of Defilement was born because humans discarded what they did not want, including the elderly. And the church missionaries were not able to cleanse the place, because Demon Souls explores the conflict between humanity and demonhood, and the idea there is that the valley was born because of black tendency, because of demonhood, because people choose to help themselves and to not help each other.
To be fair, there's also the implication that the Valley of Defilement, by virtue of being a valley, would be where things run off and down to, and if it doesn't continue to flow, then it'll become like a swamp, which is exactly what you get in a place like Blighttown in Dark Souls 1. So with this being said so far, I do wish he extended the Kagare metaphor a little bit more strongly into Dark Souls 3's territory with the stagnation of the dark kind of transforming it into the deep, which is an even like scarier, more cannibalistic version of the dark, which isn't necessarily intrinsically bad on its own until it kind of like gets forced into that role of stagnation and provocation by like flame and desire and whatnot. Freeing the Rune of Death still results in 2 talking ghosts in Ashen Lane Dell, so the rune might not even be delivering on its own supposed purpose. Well, to be fair, the Rune of Death is fractured. It doesn't exactly seem to be fully integrated into the Elden Ring, depending on how you want to look at like whatever happens to Marika. So like the red spear within her body could have been from us releasing Destined Death. I don't know. But I would disagree with many people's assessments that we return the Rune of Death to the Elden Ring once we release it after killing Malekith. But, of course, that'll just be up to individual preference there. The Valley of Defilement is really just a diseased trash heap. Well, why is it a diseased trash heap? It only got demonic once the Second Scourge began, basically when Estrella became a demon. I think it's like a multi-pronged problem where like the world tendency was getting worse essentially in a metaphorical sense, and then like people started losing their souls, their minds, their humanity, then demons appeared, and then things kept getting progressively worse, and then the Valley of Defilement, being a place where like the worst of the worst washed up, became a place where there was essentially no escape except through Estrella, who is canonically regarded as being the closest to God because of like her efforts of alleviating others' pain by taking their souls. And then Level brings up the point that we don't actually even see the Rune of Death within the Elden Ring itself in all of the endings. But to be fair, we might be mending the Golden Order, and if the Golden Order is predicated on the removal of the Rune of Death, maybe that isn't too surprising. But I do think that's a fair point you bring up.
In Elden Ring, the natural flow of life has been perverted to suit the needs of a god. And then, when the Greater Will and Queen Marika the Eternal clashed, she shattered the ring, and the seat of power was opened up to anyone who would claim it. The imperfect, corrupted order of Marika was replaced with the imperfect order of whoever was able to stake claim to a piece of land and impose their will on it. But all is decaying, and all is rotting because life goes on unending, a stagnant existence. And so, to put an end to the scarlet rot, you must allow death indiscriminate to be brought to the land. Unseal the Rune of Death and reincorporate it into the Elden Ring. Allow for the cycle of life to conclude. Do not impose the corruption any further.
I do feel like that conclusion right there, I would kind of have some mild disagreements with, especially depending on one's perspective of an ending like Gold Masks, which seems to try to codify the Golden Order even harder. And so that way, the Scarlet Rot is essentially just still part of the system and might eventually eat out the Gold Mask's order since it's unchanging and seemingly would remove death from the equation still and still codify like those who live in death because they're all technically still part of that order. So I might have like skipped ahead too far. I'll figure it out. And then Without Horns brought up a good point that they think the ghost could still exist even with the Rune of Death in the Elden Ring, because the Deathrite birds still have like the souls of their priests within their wings. And I think that is probably true to an extent. I don't necessarily know about like the white ghosts and whatnot in relation to the Rune of Death, but the way that I tend to view the Rune of Death is that it probably allows the soul to die. And so the ghosts might be able to exist for a time, but they might like eventually dissipate, and we don't really know better. But the fact that the Deathrite birds are able to have like this weird kind of subcontract with their priests to give them a different kind of rebirth might suggest that like destined death doesn't mean like total annihilation for all things always. And that's probably a fair point to bring up. Phantom Leaves says, yes, preach. You see a lot of people think that Gold Mask's ending will fix everything. That's not how you see it at all. It's just preventing the Golden Order from ever being changed. That's how I feel as well. I know some people might say that Gold Mask's ending removes free will, which might be true to an extent if you think free will has to include the ability to change the Elden Ring, but I don't really see it that way. But I also don't think Gold Mask's ending addresses any of the actual problems of the Golden Order, other than just saying like, hey guys, look, this code is functional. There's nothing wrong with it. It runs the program. Don't change it. And I think that kind of conclusion is pretty flawed.
For another video.
So let me back it up slightly.
And so, to put an end to the Scarlet Rot, you must allow death indiscriminate to be brought to the land. Unseal the Rune of Death and reincorporate it into the Elden Ring. Allow for the cycle of life to conclude. Do not impose the corruption any further. Or else, perhaps you can transcend the cycle of the world altogether. But that's a reoccurring theme of From Software for another video.
So Night Scott was saying that killing the very soul seems at odds with the purpose of the Great Rune of the Unborn and whatever spirit world the Helfin is trying to work with. I don't necessarily think so, because I think the issue is you're thinking of like killing as in like destroying being a bad thing. But if we like go back to the paradigm present within Dark Souls, if you never allow humanity to rest by letting the fire fade, then it'll continue to become stagnant and agitated and eventually transform into the bad aspects of the deep. So I think the Rune of Destined Death is essentially an inbuilt fading of the fire that will allow respite into the world and allow the cycle to cycle, and that way stagnation gets avoided. And that doesn't necessarily mean that all other things are like brought to an end, like the Helfin spirit world. That might still exist, and maybe like the Rune of Destined Death has to let things die so that way they can go into the Helfin, but we don't really know that, and it really sucks that the DLC doesn't expand on the Helfin pretty much at all directly. To destroy somebody's very soul is basically the number one evil in existence. I would disagree with that, because I would say that you're conflating destroying with consuming, and those are two different things. And so, Platinum Chip, is that a wave goodbye or a wave back in to say hi? Because I thought you were here earlier. Pretty damn confident you were. All right, so anyway, let's go to in closing.
As the Silent Hill 4 commentary notches forwards towards completion, I've decided to assemble the reoccurring themes of FromSoft series in order to have something quick I can make and release to keep the channel from dying while I put the commentary together. I've scripted out a few more of these videos, and if you like this one, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like, left a comment, and all those wonderful little interactions which the YouTube algorithm loves oh so much. But mostly, I'd love to see the cult of Kegare continue to grow, and if you ever find yourself in a FromSoft game, standing in a puddle of water or in a rotted lake, maybe think a bit harder about the narrative ramifications than Miyazaki loves Poison Swamp, LOL. I'm dutifully chipping away at assembling the next few themes of FromSoft videos, and if you want early access to those, or if you just want to support the channel, consider stopping by at patreon.com/medievalmegaman. Whenever I have a video ready early, I like to drop them there in order to give something back to you guys who supported me over the years. This video could not have been made possible without my creator friends. The Sinclair Lore Show is where Sin and Sophie have spent the better part of many years compiling and analyzing the assorted phenomena in these games. Without them, I would not know half of what I've just discussed, and I implore you, dear viewer, to give them a look at. There's FromSoft translator Rockstar Loki, who can be found at lokisouls.com and on his YouTube channel. He's also released the definitive story breakdowns for both Demon Souls and Dark Souls in his Demonic Archive and the Abyssal Archive books, linked below. I also want to thank my friend Smotown, who's done more than anyone else to elucidate me on the story of Elden Ring. Jeff, if I got something wrong, it was your fault. He's releasing the Grace Given book early next year, which dives into Elden Ring's lore, and I'm confident it will meet the highest possible standards, which his
Gotta admit, those covers look pretty swagalicious.
videos have set. Links for these creators and their works has been provided in the description box below. I've also left a link for the Reddit post by Nameless Singer, which discusses the Shifra River and the Blue Fairy. In the next reoccurring themes of From Software, we will be discussing the moon, purity, and enlightenment. I hope you stick around to check that out. Until next time, take care.
Oh yeah, that sounds cool, because I could use a little bit more contextual knowledge of like the moon type stuff as they pertain to FromSoft games at times and their relation to enlightenment. So, okay guys, I've gone ahead and linked Acer Aesthetics video into chat if you guys want to give him some support with a watch or a like. I'm sure he would appreciate that. And I've also liked that video. I'm already subscribed. That was pretty good. Obviously, he couldn't go into as much context as I would have liked at times. But to be fair, this video is already almost an hour long. And then I pretty much added almost another hour to the commentary for it, which just kind of goes to show like how pervasive Kegare and its systems really are into the world. And holy crap, Levo, thank you so much for gifting 10 memberships to the channel. That was quite generous of you. Thank you so much. That video is out now too. His next one after that is on Madness, which you're stoked about. Okay, cool. So maybe we can look at the Dung Eater video with Levo tomorrow on stream. And then I'll check if Acer's next video, like I'll look at how long it is and maybe fit that one in. Otherwise, I might go back into a couple other videos, like one by Discerning Tarnished, which we should follow up like the other like Radon Gravity video. And then he also wants me to look at his Fire Giant video one first, but I want to at least get the second part of the first video series that we're looking at. So for all of you who gotten the new gifted memberships, congratulations. I do have some projects in the works, so maybe you'll have your membership long enough for me to get like a video or two out on early access, because I think that's what is included in that tier of membership. So yeah, thank you so much, Levo. Now I need to do one thing real quick to credit you. And that's pretty much it for tonight's stream. So I'm going to look back into Acer's channel and figure out the timeline of videos. I don't know much for tomorrow, or, you know, today technically. So that'll be it for tonight's stream, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me as always. We'll be going live again at the usual time of 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hopefully we'll see you there. So until then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.